All right, perfect. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Tempe City Council Work Study Session virtual meeting on Thursday, April 8th. The time is now 4:08 p.m. Due to concerns over COVID-19 exposure, the city has implemented measures to protect our community, including the closing of council chambers and limiting public attendance to electronic means only. Members of the public may view the live meeting proceedings on Tempe Channel 11 or attend the meeting virtually through Cisco WebEx events by visiting tempe.gov/clerk for more information. First item on the agenda is the call to the audience for issue review session items. Audience members have up to 3 minutes to address the council. Madam Clerk, were there any speaker or comment cards received?
Mr. Mayor, we do have 3 speakers in the audience. First to be Mario Martinez.
Okay, sounds good. Let's see here. I will go with Mr. Martinez first.
Good afternoon. My name is Mario Martinez and I live in Tempe. I'm here to address the council on the COVID issue on the agenda. Governor Ducey recently ordered the local governments to abandon their mask mandates. Regarding COVID, Ducey's executive incompetence should be appropriately noted. Ducey's current order contradicts the Center for Disease Control, the CDC guidelines. The scientific competence of the CDC greatly surpasses Ducey's indisputable scientific incompetence. Back in June 2020, Ducey ordered the bars closed because of the COVID danger. My uncle lived in Flagstaff with his grandson, who had a part-time job at the bar, so his son stopped working there. Then Ducey said the bars were safe again, and he opened them back up, and by executive order, he forbid the cities to enact a mask mandate. At that point, my uncle's grandson went back to work at the bar. They both tested positive for COVID, and my uncle died on July 1st. Right after that, Ducey closed the bars again. Then he finally permitted the cities to enact mask mandates. My uncle's case was hardly an anomaly. The reason over 500,000 American families have suffered the same outcome as my family is because we had incompetent goofs like Ducey and Trump enacting public health guidelines that they knew nothing about. Ducey does not care about our families. He will literally sacrifice the lives of our loved ones for his political benefit. Regarding Ducey's executive orders that the cities like Tempe abandon the mask mandate, Tempe should resist this order at all costs. The lives of our citizens are more valuable than Ducey's lack of concern for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez, and so sorry for the loss of your uncle. So thank you for coming this evening.
Next
yes.
would be Nicole Galvan.
Okay, Ms. Galvan?
Mayor, Vice Mayor, and council members, my name is Nicole Galvan, and I'm speaking to you as a citizen again to ask you to please add an animal welfare position in Tempe. As you may know, I recently found myself trying to get animal welfare laws enforced in this city. As I mentioned last time I spoke to you, my nonprofit has been working on the puppy mill issue in Arizona for some time, and we are experts in pet sourcing laws across the country. We caught a local pet store breaking the state law hundreds of times and were met with hostility and resistance from Tempe PD when we tried to get these laws enforced. Tempe is no different than cities across the country where citizens are pleading with lawmakers to reallocate funds from police to other departments. I worry that those pleas are going to be ignored as you mill over such a small cost for this new position. Meanwhile, I have witnessed this city spend thousands of dollars to militarize a police SUV with a camouflage car wrap for no reason at all. Please allow experts in various fields to take over where it's appropriate so that police can focus solely on public safety and their presence does not unnecessarily escalate various other situations. There is no better place to do this than with animal welfare. Someone with expertise can handle dog bite complaints, wildlife inquiries, barking dogs, feral cats, and connect people to resources in order to keep their pets safe, healthy, and fed. I was surprised by the hesitancy from this council during the last work study session to do just that. Here we have an opportunity to do something great for animals and people alike, and there is hesitancy. If you were to give this initiative to Tempe citizens for a vote, I guarantee you that they would vote in favor of this by an overwhelming majority. But there was talk on this council of waiting a year. As a citizen and as an animal rescuer, I beg you not to wait a year. During the pandemic, as more people than ever worked from home and skipped vacations, there was a significant uptick in people acquiring household pets. Now those people are about to go on vacation as the country opens back up. Those people are about to get evicted as the eviction moratorium draws near to an end in June. And many of those pet owners are about to face foreclosure when the moratorium for that ends in September of this year. In the animal welfare community, we are bracing for impact. All this while the East Valley County Shelter closed indefinitely and no longer has a presence in the Tempe area. While some members of this council remain hesitant to move this very popular initiative forward, I am begging you not to wait. In the coming months, this position will be more needed than ever before. Please approve a full-time animal welfare position and continue to make Tempe a leader and an innovator in how we do city government. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Galvan. And Madam Clerk, you have one more speaker.
Mayor, I'm not seeing her in the audience. Maybe Alex can help me. It was Anna Mellis.
You are correct, Madam Clerk. There is not that individual in the audience.
Okay, Mayor, then if you would like, I can move on to reading the comments.
Yes, let's do that, please.
First comment comes from Mr. Ronald Tapscott, resident of Tempe. Ron writes, Mayor and Council, recently the following statements have been issued regarding COVID-19. World Health Organization Director General Tedros told world leaders Thursday in a virtual summit on the COVID-19 pandemic. The deadly coronavirus, Tedros said, is a defining health crisis of our time. Millions of people could die if governments don't take aggressive action against the coronavirus. CDC Director Rochelle Walensky issued an urgent plea to Americans Monday to continue following public health measures. Governors and mayors have been tossing aside restrictions that have been shown to reduce transmission of the coronavirus, including mask mandates and capacity limits on businesses and activities. Positive COVID-19 cases have increased by 10.6% compared to previous 7-day period. Hospitalizations and deaths, which are a lagging metric, also rose over the last 7-day period by 4.2% and 2.6% respectively. And daily infections are way down in the U.S. from the January peaks, but they stagnated at about 40,000 to 50,000 cases a day. Now they're at 60,000 to 70,000. Jennifer Nuzzo, a public health researcher at Johns Hopkins University, stated there's a risk of a resurgence, particularly in states that lifted restrictions and mask mandates. Dr. Anthony Fauci warned what we're likely seeing, increased infection and death rates, is because of things like spring break and pulling back on mitigation methods that you've seen. Now, several states have done that. And specifically in Arizona, the ASU Biodesign Institute found the new COVID-19 variant stemming from cases in Arizona. Dr. Shad Marvasti with the University of Arizona College of Medicine stated, unfortunately, I have to say I'm not surprised because a lot of our policy decisions have made us a breeding ground for COVID-19 here in Arizona. We really don't know how widespread this is, so it could be much worse than we're seeing right now. Given these newly documented events, Tempe Neighborhoods Together, TNT, representatives call on our city to continue to use its emergency proclamation to ensure the protection of our residents. And it's signed Catherine Mancini, Justin Stewart, Linda Martin, Kevin Brown, Chuck Buss, Deborah Zajac, Gail Majors, Sid Freed, Michelle Brown, Judy Tapscott, John Mulford, Phil Amorosi, Jana Granillo, Paul Hubble, Christy Kimball, Candace Toller, Anna Till, Miriam Ephraim, and Ron Tapscott.
Madam Clerk, really quickly, well, just one thing I don't know, actually, I've not seen the comment cards in advance, so I'm not sure which subjects they're on, but I wanted to make a note here that I intend to pull item 4A1 so if there's things kind of related to animal welfare, I'm wondering if in the pool, I'm not even sure if there are, but I'm wondering if we can hold those till the next meeting, perhaps, if they're already.
Mayor, I have one additional card for 4A1. The rest of these are related to the issue review session items.
Since it's only one more, we can go ahead and read that one then.
Okay, the one for additional for animal welfare, you want me to read that one as well?
Sure, since it's only one more.
Yeah, it's only one for that, but we have several for the other items.
You got
So
it.
the additional for animal welfare also comes from Ron Tapscott, and he's asking me to read the name of the signers, and he writes, Mayor and Council, currently the city's response to animal welfare is being handled by volunteer labor and piecemeal in various city departments. The city has set a precedent by launching a successful program addressing the large number of feral cats in Tempe neighborhoods. The advent of a full-time position would address a myriad of other concerns: loose dogs, tied down dogs, which is against our laws, abused dogs, and oversight of the invasive red-eared slider turtles, pigeons, especially those being fed, wildlife, foxes, coyotes, and javelina. In addition, a full-time position would foster further education, strategic planning, and collaboration with residents and community stakeholders. Please find this letter signed by Tempe Neighborhoods Together, TNT members, in support of funding this position and further developing this program. Catherine Mancini, Judy Tapscott, Linda Martin, Kevin Brown, Chuck Buss, Deborah Zajac, Gail Majors, Sid Freed, Michelle Brown, John Mulford, Phil Amorosi, Christy Kimball, Candace Toller, Ann Till, Jenna Granillo, Miriam Ephraim, and Ron Tapscott. So next item relates to item 2A1 from Melanie Harmon. Melanie writes, Dear Council people, I've worked in Tempe full-time for over 4 years. The way the lack of guidance and clarity from local governments has wrought havoc on my small workplace has buried me from having to declare my close friend died from COVID, and I have been exposed. The first time they accepted they needed to change anything, to my best friend who works with me, getting her work from home request denied 4 times despite being immune compromised. They will only enforce CDC guidelines if it is local law. The morning Ducey declared it over, half my workplace shed their masks and the other half hid in their offices in terror. Just make it simple for employers and reinstate till we hit much higher vaccination percentages, please. Thank you. Next item also relates to item 2A1 from Beth Verscher, resident of Tempe. Beth writes, it's my fond hope that the mayor and council will act in the best interests of our community and follow the advice and counsel of the CDC and the leadership Tucson, Flagstaff, and Phoenix have shown by keeping Tempe's mask mandate, capacity limits for restaurants and bars, and event capacity restrictions that were in place prior to our governor's irresponsible claim that COVID is under control in Arizona and subsequently lifting of restrictions. Do the right thing. This next item also applies to item 2A1 from Susan Soroka. Susan writes, as a 71-year-old resident of Tempe with an underlying health condition, I have been keenly concerned not only for my safety, but for others who, like me, are elderly and may have a pre-existing condition that could predispose for a fatal case of COVID-19. I was so appreciative when Mayor Corey Woods instituted a mask mandate for Tempe. With the known COVID variants on the rise and only 40% of Maricopa County's population having received 2 doses of the vaccine, it would seem prudent to keep a mask mandate in place. I urge the Tempe City Council and Mayor to join Phoenix, Tucson, Flagstaff, and Pima County in protecting their citizens by maintaining a mask mandate. Thank you. The next one comes from M Confidential. M writes, hello, I live and work in Tempe. I would like my comment read during the meeting, which I'm doing now, but I've obscured my name due to fears of retaliation from my work. Immediately following Ducey's announcement, my work made their own announcement that masks are no longer required in the office and no one can ask another employee to wear a mask when in close proximity. I have been lucky enough to schedule my first vaccine dose within the week of that announcement, but that leaves me unprotected while working in Tempe for the next month at a minimum due to the lack of masks. I can't even get to the bathroom without running into maskless people shouting in the hallways. The only thing my place of employment will abide is the law or city mandate, since they have and will ignore public workplace safety. Please, I implore the Tempe City Council to issue their citywide mask mandate and give us that much more time to get vaccinated and closer to herd immunity. I implore Tempe City Council to follow the intelligent example that Phoenix, Tucson, and Flagstaff have made in issuing their own mask mandates and protecting their citizens. I trust you will do the smart and moral thing for your citizens and instate a citywide mask mandate. Thank you for your time. Next card also relates to item 2A from Robert Fine. Robert writes, as a proud 85-year-old resident of Tempe since 1996, I hope the mayor and city council will have the good sense to heed the judgment of Dr. Anthony Anthony Fauci, the CDC, and most local medical professionals to the effect that our city and nation are far from having COVID-19 and its emerging variants under control. I implore you to keep in place Tempe's reasonable measures to protect ourselves, the mask mandate, social distancing, and the various capacity restrictions for various venues like cafes, restaurants, bars, and public events. We will know soon enough when these mandatory restrictions can be safely lifted. Now is not the time. Thank you for your attention. Next item also relates to item 2A from Eve Golding. Eve writes, I want to express my support for a public mask policy in the city of Tempe until at least a majority of citizens in our area have been fully vaccinated. Only 4 in 10 people in Maricopa County have received a full vaccination as of April 7th per maricopa.gov. I don't decide I'm safe to take off my seatbelt or stop paying attention to traffic signals when I'm halfway home. Let's not abandon public health measures in a similar manner. Masks are still currently useful in protecting our citizens' health during this pandemic. Next item, also related to 2A, comes from Christian Carl Conway Dweck. Members of the council, I'm writing to you in regards to the lifting of the mask mandate by Governor Ducey and his subsequent order that all municipalities in Arizona rescind their mask mandates as well. This order by Governor Ducey is both terrible policy and excessive overreach by his office. It is plain that it is intended not to protect public health, but rather to score political points with his most extreme supporters. The simple fact is that we are still in the middle of a deadly pandemic that will not be over until the vast majority of the population of this country has been vaccinated. Until that time, wearing masks in public is the only scientifically proven way to prevent the spread of COVID while also allowing people to live something close to normal lives. Governor Ducey is not a scientist, and we should not be listening to his politically motivated rollback of public health measures. I ask, therefore, that the council refuse to rescind Tempe's mask mandate until such a time as the CDC no longer recommends wearing masks in public. Next item actually relates to item 2E, the budget, from Mr. Brian Speer, resident of Tempe, and he writes regarding the downtown traffic mitigation plan. I have been a Tempe resident since 1988 and have lived in the same home for most of that time on Farmer Avenue. Regarding the proposed traffic mitigation plan that's being considered as part of the CIP, I say, hallelujah, it's about time. It is imperative we do better to make our streets safer and protect our neighborhoods. We can do this. Next item also relates to the item 2E, the CIP, from Vic Mathis, resident of Tempe. Mr. Mathis writes he'd like to voice his opposition related to the right-hand turn issue at Ash Avenue and 9th Street intersection. He lives right on the corner and therefore will not be able to access his driveway. He agrees that all the traffic is a valid point. However, he believes there needs to be another solution for that intersection. Mr. Mathis stated he is not the only person who feels this way and feels he does not have a voice regarding the intersection issues because he does not have access to a computer. Mr. Mathis stated further that if the meetings were held at the City of Tempe Council chambers, he would also be able to attend. And just as a note, the City Clerk's office did enter this information on Mr. Mathis's behalf over the phone due to his lack of computer. Mr. Mayor, that wraps up the public speaker cards.
Great. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Really appreciate it. Next up then is item 2A, COVID-19 update and public health protocols. And I'll call upon our City Attorney, Judy Bauman.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, members of council. Alex, are you able to help us with the video?
One moment.
Okay, thank you.
I believe Chief Reese might have the video available. Is that correct?
Just the PowerPoint.
Oh, yes, PowerPoint.
Thank you. I can go ahead and get started, Mayor, if that's your preference.
Sure, Madam City Attorney, go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. Good afternoon, Mayor, council members. I have been asked to provide some updated information with respect to the governor's orders. He has issued executive order number 2021-06 on March 25th, 2021, and it's titled Business Guidelines Transition from Requirements to Recommendations. Part of the executive order lifts restrictions on organized public events as outlined in the previous executive order, although adequate safety precautions are still encouraged. Thank you for that. Are still encouraged to limit the spread of COVID-19. I will note that the Tempe City Code Section 5-2 may still require a special events permit for certain events that meet the criteria outlined in the code. The executive order encourages businesses that serve the public to continue to take actions recommended by the CDC, Department of Health Services, U.S. Department of Labor, OSHA, and others to limit the spread of COVID-19. The executive order also purports to lift mask mandates put in place by locales such as counties, cities, or towns. The order references state law under Title 26 that grants local jurisdictions, including cities, the authority to pass local emergency measures not inconsistent with the orders, rules, and regulations promulgated by the governor. It expressly recognizes the authority of cities to regulate protocols in city buildings and public transportation. I will note that other Arizona jurisdictions, including Pima County and the cities of Flagstaff, Tucson, and Phoenix, have stated that they intend to keep their mask mandates in place. Legal opinions as to the authority of several of these jurisdictions have been requested from the Attorney General's office, and at this point, the Attorney General has issued an opinion with respect to Pima County's mask mandate and did not uphold the governor's authority to preempt Pima County based on the law that he cited. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we look to applicable law. There are many that apply in this public health arena. The Tempe City Charter authorizes the mayor to deem that an emergency exists and then to rule by proclamation to preserve the peace and order of the city. That's section 104 of the Tempe City Charter. State law also grants authority to a city mayor to deem that an emergency exists and impose necessary regulations to preserve the peace and order of the city. Pursuant to these authorities, Tempe issued a mayoral proclamation on June 18th, 2020, requiring face coverings to be worn in public where physical distancing cannot be maintained. In addition to this, the Constitution and state statutes authorize the governor to govern during a public health emergency and also authorizes the Department of Health Services to coordinate public emergency responses among state, local, and tribal authorities. There are other applicable laws as well, including the security directive issued by the Federal Transportation Security Administration, the TSA, on January 31st, 2021, that requires masks be worn in and on all public transportation facilities. This would include buses, light rail, shelters, and light rail platforms. In addition, the Arizona Supreme Court, the judicial branch of the government, issued orders requiring safety protocols to be maintained during the pandemic, which includes mandatory face coverings. This is pursuant to rules in Maricopa County and judicial branch operations and includes the Tempe Municipal Court. I will now hand the presentation over to Assistant Police Chief Mike Pooley.
Hi, Mayor and Council. Sorry about that. Currently, our Tempe police officers, when they're dispatched to a business that is requesting assistance for a mask violation, our officers are going out there and working with the businesses to assure that they feel supported and that they are able to create whatever rules or regulations they want within their own business. Our officers are able to go out there and work with the businesses to see if they want somebody trespass from their facility. If that is the case, we will assist them in doing that. We will continue to work with our businesses so they feel comfortable in whatever way we are able to make sure that they can operate safely. And we will wait and see what happens with the orders that come out from the City Council and the Mayor tonight. I'll turn it back over to Judy Bauman.
Thank you so much, Chief. We appreciate it. I believe that now we are going to hear from the employee group and their recommendations on reopening.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Judy, this is Alex. Could you provide me some guidance on who will be
I
speaking?
think it's coming over to me, Keith Burke, Alex.
Thank
Can hear me
you.
okay?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. If you go next slide, Alex. I think we have a little bit of an update. Mayor and Council, Keith Burke, Community Services Director. As you're aware, we wanted to provide a little bit of update on the community services facilities. And we continue to provide city opportunities for parks and recreation activities, arts and culture programs, and library services while working through the pandemic. Virtual programming has been an incredible part of our new reality, allowing us to stay connected with the residents and others throughout the valley. Currently, almost all of our department facilities are open to the public, still following recommended mitigation strategies and requiring masks while indoors or outside where social distancing is not available or not possible. As you see there on the slide, Kiwanis indoor pool is currently open, and our outdoor pools will open for the regular summer season at the end of May. The aquatics team will follow similar safety protocols that we put in place and guidelines that allowed us to be open last year. And moving forward for this year, we're hoping for a regular summer season. The splash play areas, the parks were closed last spring, along with many other city amenities, as we work to understand the pandemic early and implementing safety protocols and minimizing large gatherings within our park areas. Splash play areas are currently open and available, which is great because the weather's heating up right now. And we will continue to notify residents through social media and marketing to talk about using the space safely, using social distancing protocols, and wearing masks when not possible. Next slide, please, Alex. Can you go back one? Thank you. The recreation facilities are planning to bring in-person programs and indoor starting June 1st, with registration and advertising beginning next month. This will include opportunities for our senior centers to also reopen. Safety precautions and protocols will be in place, including reduced occupancy to allow for proper social distancing during on-site visits. The Special Events Task Force has been processing applications for indoor and outdoor events, ranging from small gatherings with 100 to 200 attendants to possible larger events like triathlons looking to come back over the next 2 months, 3 months. COVID plans are still required for permit approval, as well as mask wearing while at the event. Task Force will continue to follow state benchmarks over the next few months as we move towards reviewing our normal fall event applications. Last slide, please, Alex. Next slide, I'm sorry. Thank you. The library has been open since June of 2020 and will continue to provide access to all materials for patrons through assisted checkouts and hold programs for user convenience. Staff has recently added evening hours and Saturday availability to increase access for families and patrons that couldn't normally get here during the week before 5 p.m. We will continue to moderately adjust access over the next few months, with anticipating full operation of the library beginning in August, including the browsing of the stacks and the Tempe Friends of the Library Cafe, and also the bookstore. So that's exciting to hear as we move forward through the summer. Lastly, the arts and culture facilities have recently opened to allow patrons to really enjoy the new exhibits at the TCA and the museum, and we'll continue to evaluate opportunities for possible community facility reservations late in the summer before we return to full programming in the fall. The exhibits are really great for the patrons to get out, and I recommend getting out to check them out yourself. The museum is the Virtual Invaders Arcade History of Tempe, and then the TCA has an Explore and Go Boldly visual art exhibit. So I'm here to answer any questions in reference to the community services facilities and the plans moving forward as we continue to improve on the statistics and data for COVID cases within the Valley.
Thank you, Keith. Really appreciate it. I'd ask staff, does that conclude the presentation or just Keith's portion?
Mayor,
that's just my portion.
Okay, but just curious. So thank you, Keith. Council, any questions or comments for Keith? All right, thank you so much.
Mayor, we'll go ahead and turn it over to Chief for Tempe Fire Medical Rescue, Greg Reese.
Great, thank you.
Yes, hi, Mr. Mayor, members of council, Greg Reese, Fire Medical Rescue Chief. I have been asked to introduce our emergency manager. I know that you have been introduced to her, and she has done a great deal of work in presenting to you in our weekly meetings throughout the pandemic. This is the first time that she has presented to our community, so it is my pleasure to introduce our community to Michelle Seitz, who joined us last year during the pandemic and quickly took on that emergency management role where she was working for the state of Wisconsin. And she joined us not only during the pandemic, but as you recall, during the train derailment, where we had not only incident management team in place that is working through the pandemic, but we then went into the same process as we worked through the derailment, and she has continued to work on various committees and task force, not only here in our city, but as a representative around the Valley. And one of the tasks that she's had recently is working with other department leaders on a plan for the time that we start to slowly reopen the city, and the decisions that would be made in supporting that process. And so she is here to report out from that subcommittee tonight. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to our emergency manager, Michelle Seitz.
Thank you, Chief Reese, and good afternoon, Mayor and members of Council. Before I begin with the presentation, I would like to provide you with some background. As the emergency manager, I have been responding to COVID-19 here in the city of Tempe since I arrived in my position last May. I began in the Emergency Operations Center that eventually transformed into a virtual incident management team. That consists of 2 commanders, a safety officer, public information officer, legal representation, liaison officers, emergency management, planning, logistics, operations, and finance and administration. This team supports the City of Tempe's continued response to COVID-19. At this point, we are meeting on a bi-weekly basis and reviewing all COVID data and trends on a daily basis. We have also collected lessons learned and best practices throughout our response to the pandemic, not just from the City of Tempe, but from various counties, states, and federal partners as well. With that background, a few weeks back, I was asked to facilitate and reconvene the reopening committee that was originally assembled last year to determine what a reopening might look like here in Tempe. At that time, this group developed some great resources on phased reopening and also surveyed our city employees to get a pulse on how staff was coping with the pandemic at the time. And now, as times have changed and COVID-19 vaccinations are becoming readily available, it was felt we needed to develop a reopening strategy from an emergency management perspective that encompassed our lessons learned and best practices. As the original reopening committee consisted of 42 members, I pulled together a small but mighty subcommittee in order to develop the recommendations you see here in this presentation for reopening. So our subcommittee has recommended that the reopening process begin on June 1st, 2021. This date signifies the time in which each department director, working along with their respective staff, determined 3 things: the appropriate time frame for their specific department, if different than June 1st, the proper safety protocols within their department for both the public and staff, and finally, the reopening structure that works best for their specific department. Next slide, please. Thank you. The subcommittee came up with June 1st, 2021, based on the following items. Vaccine eligibility. So March 10th, 2021, essential workers were deemed eligible to receive the vaccination. And this included state and local government frontline workers who maintain critical infrastructure and continued critical services and functions. And then by March 24th, 2021, anyone 16 years or older were deemed eligible to receive the vaccination. It was also based on the full vaccination time frame. So it takes Pfizer and Moderna vaccinations 1 to 2 weeks after the second dose to be considered fully vaccinated, 42 days from the initial shot. And for Johnson & Johnson, it is 1 shot in 28 days. The vaccination scheduling. So vaccination clinics have been scheduling out anywhere from 1 to 21 days, depending on the appointment availability. Opportunities for and the timeline to get in for an appointment are expected to continually improve as more vaccine availability continues and the additional locations, including pharmacies and physician offices, begin to open up. The time frame for full vaccination. So time frame for full vaccination is 43 to 63 days. This accounts for scheduling and time to become fully vaccinated. So March 10th, 2021 plus 63 days is May 12th. March 24th, 2021 plus 63 days is May 26th. We also took into account the last day of school instruction because employees may need to plan for dependent care prior to returning to the office. Next slide, please. Thank you. While city facilities are being reopened, the committee felt it necessary to continue with safety protocols and recommends each department appoint a COVID-19 lead for the purpose of receiving information regarding current protocols and providing information regarding current department operations. It is recommended that each director establish a primary and alternate team leader based on the leaders specific to each department's continuity of operations plan. These leaders can assist with the reopening process, serve as a point of contact for employees' questions and concerns, and provide information from city management to departmental staff, and provide departmental information to city management relative to department operations. Next slide, please. Thank you. Mitigation measures. It is recommended to continue mandating the following mitigation measures until June 1st, 2021 for all city facilities and programs. Face coverings, physical distancing, limited occupancy, and symptom screening protocols. On the June 1st deadline, it is recommended that we evaluate the need to continue these mitigation efforts based on the community spread transmission levels at that time. If the transmission levels are satisfactory, and as a city, we are aligned with the county, Arizona Department of Health Services, and CDC guidance, we recommend the mandate for these particular mitigation measures cease. As our incident management team is continually collecting COVID data and following the latest trends, we will keep appraised of any trends that may require us to reconsider and reestablish these mitigation efforts. It is also recommended that the following mitigation measures continue. Employees shall stay at home when sick. Hand washing and cleaning procedures. Physical barriers that have already been installed can stay, and the routine cleaning and disinfecting of personnel and shared equipment and space is still necessary. Next slide, please. Thank you. As many City of Tempe employees have been working remotely in order to keep safe and healthy throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, it is the subcommittee's recommendation that the director of each department, working with their leaders, determine the work structure that is best for each individual employee. The work structures to consider are full-time office staffing, remote office hybrid model staffing, and remote by exception. Next slide, please. Thank you. And finally, this is our last recommendation. Because we realize that each department is different and has learned various lessons and best practices on their own through this pandemic, We wanted to ensure that directors had autonomy to think creatively and identify ways to develop a more effective and efficient workspace by providing them and their leaders the opportunity to submit new and inventive work plans for consideration. That concludes my presentation, Mr. Mayor.
Mayor, we are here as staff to take council's direction. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. I see Vice Mayor Keating.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Thank you, staff, for that presentation. I fully agree with your recommendations. To a commenter's point earlier, I do think the governor's decision was largely based in politics and not public health. And one of the things you learn in Civics 101, freshman year of high school, is the number one responsibility of any governmental body is to maintain public safety. And of course, public safety very much includes public health. With the vaccines being available to everyone 16 and up now, we're not too far off from, a return to normalcy here. In fact, I would say, just given the vaccination rates and, the ease of now as appointments are easier to come by, the end of summer really, I would say would be appropriate to remove the mask mandate, but now certainly is not the time right as we're starting to see, a light at the end of this tunnel. So I'm fully in support of keeping the mayor's proclamation in place. One of the things that was not talked about that I would like to see though, and I would hope my colleagues agree, would be some sort of aggressive PR campaign to let businesses know in the city of Tempe that masks are still required in our city. I'm sure it'll be a shock to you, Mayor, and the rest of my colleagues. Not everyone follows us as closely as we do. So, they probably will never know that the city of Tempe is following Phoenix and Flagstaff and Tucson and Pima County's lead in, ensuring the safety of our citizens in indoor spaces. So I would like to see our communications team, put this out aggressively, repeatedly through all channels to get the word out there so our citizens know too that we have their safety in mind, and they will also then have some sort of mechanism to address their concerns to the city for enforcement measures. So I'm fully in support of this. Staff's presentation was great. I agree with everything they said. And that's my 2 cents in this matter. Thank you very much, Mayor.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Keating. Next up, Councilmember Adams.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too agree with Vice Mayor Keating's approach to what he talked about. He really covered most of the things that I was concerned about, and the presentation was excellent, very thorough. Staff, you've done an incredible job through a difficult time, so I really appreciate all your hard work and dedication to keeping our residents safe. I also agree with Vice Mayor Keating's approach to have a very aggressive campaign so our businesses and our community know what's out there and what we expect, and so we can get everybody on the same page. So thanks, Vice Mayor Keating, for covering so much of what I was going to say. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Adams. Councilmember Navarro.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I definitely know we're at the finish line here. We're getting close, and we need to kind of support the mask as best we can and make sure that our citizens feel safe, obviously, and we're safe in our community. We have a great wastewater system that we're using to track COVID. We're utilizing our tools from our public safety, fire departments and whatnot to coincide with those pieces of information. I think that we are, as a city, really can start making measurements and seeing how we're tracking and continuing to be tracking in a certain way. So I want to stress that we need to utilize that information so that we can either make faster decisions to either, take down the mandate in our areas and or make decisions to implement more mandates if we have to for those areas. But going forward, when it comes down to the restaurants and people that are trying to survive out there, They're getting, I absolutely understand they're getting a breath of air here just by getting some business. Obviously, you know, I want to support them and I want to make sure that they are not suffering by being the police of the mask mandate. Because when you have contradicting orders from the governor, from the city, you know, I don't want them to be the police department of this thing. Now, if they need police assistance and help, obviously we're always going to encourage that. But at the same time, you know, you can still go into a restaurant, you can still go into a store, just wear your mask, you know, do the simplest thing as that. And I think that's not a hard thing to swallow, because as you look now, and there are some restaurants who still abide by those rules, it's almost business as usual out there. And all they're doing is just absolutely saying, hey, just wear a mask when you come in, sit down, then take it off and enjoy your meal. Go into a store and shop, just wear your mask, you know, things like that. So yes, we are close to the finish line. I just, you know, worry about the policing part of it, on putting those onuses on the business owners who are absolutely saying you need to wear a mask when you come in here, have fun, do all those things, but they cannot be, you know, ultimately the cop of this stuff too. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Councilmember Navarro. Any other council members' comments? Councilmember Cubie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Really appreciate it. Yeah, I agree with the council members. I think it's essential that we keep the mask mandate in place. And Professor David Cater wrote and was so eloquent in his statement how the governor's order to end the masks is utterly inexplicable given the continued pandemic, the relatively still insufficient number of us fully vaccinated, the variants that are now even more omnipresent, and the overwhelming view of virologists and other scientists involved in seeking to end the pandemic. So I also urge us to stand with our fellow mayors and cities across Arizona who are protecting and putting the public health #1 in their minds, and keep our mask mandate. And as Vice Mayor Keating said, we really need to continue and even do a better job with enforcement that we have. I know we're always going to be education first, but I know our businesses also said that it was very helpful that they had the Tempe mask mandate in place, and they could say to an unhappy customer, hey, this is the city of Tempe. If you have problems, take it up with them. And we're the ones that should be able to defend that decision. So I know that was very supportive of businesses, and we have to keep up with massive communication. And the other thing I wanted to mention, though, about our employees, I'm just slightly worried about the numbers of vaccinated employees. Like, shouldn't we be looking at a metric of how many employees are vaccinated before we ask people to come back to work? And I know that because the vaccine is accessible and available doesn't necessarily mean it's available to all. And I also know there's some people that are going to refuse to get the vaccine, and they may put fellow employees in harm's way because they're not willing to get the vaccine. So I'm hoping that we're considering the number of people vaccinated and the accessibility, and to know for sure that we have people vaccinated before we make our ultimate decision to reopen on June 1st. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mayor?
Yes, Councilmember Navarro.
Yeah, just to add on to Councilmember Kubi's question on the vaccine, and my question is probably to the city, because I know other cities are kind of dealing with this. What is it to any employee to provide that information? That's their information. If they choose to provide it or not choose to provide it, what have we looked into legally for us to obtain that information, and how are we going to obtain that? That's my question.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I know that ASU has people download their vaccination status. I don't know if that's possible for us, but I think people can willingly supply that information. But I want to know if we have a percentage, or we have an understanding of how many of our employees are vaccinated. And if someone gives up that information willingly, it's one thing, right? So at minimum, we should seem to want to know what the percentage of vaccinated are in our employee classes.
Yes, I was going to say, Councilmember QB, yes, you and I are both employees of the university, and I know I've had to upload my vaccination record to an online app that I have to check in every morning, and I know you have to do the same. I was going to ask if a member of staff, perhaps our city manager, Andrew Ching, or someone else from staff could answer that Councilmember Navarro's question regarding what he said.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is Andrew Ching. I will tell you that to date, we have not decided to make proof of vaccination a prerequisite for returning to work. It's not something we crossed, because what you just saw in front of you, the proposed plans that we are working on with the subcommittee of the reopening committee, is something that we are subject to change. I mean, we propose these things as sort of prospectively, assuming that things move on a positive trajectory from here, that this is what we would want to do. But there are, of course, factors that we'd have to think about when it comes to actual implementation. One of which would be legally the extent to which our city gives guidance that we are, in fact, permitted to ask that sort of question. There are, as you know, some personal health considerations in terms of records that we'd have to fully address. We'd also look to see what other local agencies, cities are doing. That's something I think that we would also want to have and to know. The short answer is we have not yet determined that we either A, have the capacity, or B, are going to ask the question. Now, whether that means that we're putting employees at risk, we might be putting employees at risk, true, if they come back, A, that there's no accommodation made between, as we said on the slide you saw, between a supervisor and an employee who may have to explain something to the effect of, hey, I want to get a vaccine, but I've had trouble doing it, or I have some health conditions that might make it difficult. Perhaps in those situations, and I would say perhaps more than perhaps, that's the kind of accommodation at a departmental or division or supervisor to employee level that we should be hearing, to allow for the accommodation to say, unless and until you feel comfortable in your situation to potentially come back to work, we should take those things into consideration to tailor solutions on an individual basis to a certain extent. There's all sorts of things we can say at a larger macro level, but until you get to a granular level and understand the needs of any particular area and any particular employee or supervisor, I don't want to say that those kind of conversations aren't going to occur or shouldn't occur, if that makes sense.
Mayor, to that point, would it be possible to get a legal opinion? Doesn't have to be now, on the legality of requiring vaccination before returning to work within the city of Tempe? I know, speaking for my day job, I have to be vaccinated before I return to work, and I think that's an appropriate measure.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Keating. I guess I'll turn to our city attorney, Judy Bauman. Is it possible that the council can receive maybe a legal opinion at the next executive session on this matter?
Certainly, Mayor. We will be happy to provide that.
Great, thank you.
To that point, Mr. Mayor, I was hoping we could also find out what other cities are doing, because I imagine they have the same issues and questions. So it might be good to know what Phoenix, Tucson, Flagstaff, and others are doing in the state.
That sounds good to me as well, absolutely.
But I also want to say I really appreciate City Manager Ching's statements that we want each employee to feel comfortable going back to work. And if for some reason the vaccine hasn't been accessible to them, or there's still timing and a week to go before there's that the magical time of 2 weeks after the second shot, they should be able to talk to the department head or supervisor, but also be able to talk to somebody else if they don't get a satisfactory answer. Because we want to make sure that we're consistent across all employee classes, and that everyone is afforded the same protection and accessibility.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember QB. Appreciate it. Next up, Councilmember Garland.
Hi, thank you, Mayor. I was starting to raise my hand to say that I agreed with Vice Mayor Keating, and I do. And then Councilmember Adams got on. I agree with her, and then I agree with Lauren. So I'm just going to check the box and say I agree with everybody. I stand with all of you on the requests that we would like to have regarding the employees, and then our mask mandate that we have right now in place. So I agree with everybody. Checked all the boxes.
Great, thank you, Councilmember Garland. I've got a question of staff, and I've got some things I'd like to add to the record as well. So one of the questions I'm sure we'll get from members of the public, and actually I've already received it from some, is, we're talking about a tentative reopening deadline for all city facilities and like removing of masks by June 1st. But have we developed those same guidelines, period, when we talk about the mask mandate for private businesses, for all other kinds of public spaces? Because I know I saw the June 1st thing, but I want to make sure we're being clear. That was sort of a city reopening guideline from a public facility standpoint. But have we determined a number when it comes to just the general public and private businesses?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Ching.
Yeah, I think I'll try to answer that question. The answer is Michelle's presentation was speaking strictly in terms of some of the preparations that we're making for city employees for the City of Tempe organization. The presentation with respect to what Keith Burke did in terms of looking at public-facing facilities and welcoming the public back to some of those facilities on a gradual, limited basis is really with respect to properties that we own. Our presentation wasn't intended to cover every instance of how the private sector might be having the similar conversations. I will say that a lot of what you're hearing here and seeing here is informed by understanding what sort of consensus viewpoints are from other employers, including public and private employers.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ching. I think, so my thing really is on that, I want to make sure that whatever we're doing, and I'm not saying we have to be consistent I know we're talking about different populations, and obviously the general public is a much larger number than just the number of city employees. At the same time, as we're kind of providing a little bit of a window into, if the numbers continue to go down and the vaccinations continue to go up, that we'll be able to reopen city facilities, for our employees and members of the public. But I think it's also important that we have a conversation, as a city about what that would actually take to not open things up, but to remove mask mandates and things of that nature for the entire public. I think that's the question I could see myself being asked by a resident. It's great that the city has developed these sort of standards internally for themselves, but what about the general public at large if the council chooses to reaffirm the mask mandate? So that's something I would like to, I would love to see us develop. I don't know what we would be looking at, whether it is vaccination rates, whether it's, declining COVID-19 infections. But I think there's probably people we can tap into, at Maricopa County Public Health or Arizona State University or whoever might be able to assist us with that. But I think that I would like to make sure that we can actually give that kind of hope as well to our residents and to business owners. Now, the reality is we know that we can't, even with, city employees and public buildings, that these are sort of tentative reopening guidelines. And obviously we have to leave flexibility in the case that something changes. So, I'm not asking for a hard and fast date, but I'm asking that in some sense, if we could apply some of the same criteria to the public as well, but also make sure that we find a way in a kind of front-facing fashion to communicate that to members of the public so they can see exactly kind of what measurements the council's looking at and what staff is looking at to make those determinations surrounding the mask mandate and what we choose to do moving forward. Mr. Ching, would that be okay to do that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. In thinking about what you're saying here, I think I get it. I mean, we want to make sure that if we're going to continue, as we're hearing tonight, in enforcing and having the mask mandates, that there should be some guidance back to the public to say, if we get to a certain place with respect to number of new cases or percentage of total individuals vaccinated, or any of those types of metrics that we understand, that there's a place at which we would say this is an appropriate time to reconsider the mask mandate. Okay, yes, exactly. And I believe that's something that we can and should work on and provide that information and guidance to the council.
Thank you, Mr. Ching. I appreciate that tremendously. Just a few.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes,
I just want to mention that I like what you were saying about going to ASU and the epidemiology team there, biodesign, and Dr. Joe Gerald from the University of Arizona School of Public Health. They're important stakeholders to consider, and ultimately the CDC, right? I mean, the CDC isn't necessarily talking about specifically Maricopa County, so we also have to work with the Arizona Department of Health Services as well. But the CDC is no longer quite as politicized as it was in previous months with information and guidance. I think that it's a bit more reliable. And I realize that there's an interplay of local and regional context here, but we do have experts, and they are at U of A and ASU, and I appreciate that you mentioned bringing in those scientists. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Couple of quick things here. Just from my perspective, looking at the Attorney General's opinion first and foremost, that, reaffirming Pima County's ability to have a mask mandate is obviously something that I've looked at in terms of making my own decision on this matter. And the fact that they were allowed to continue this, whatever gives, I think, a lot of hope for cities and towns that we would be able to continue to govern our cities based on the way that we think is best for our residents and businesses. As we always talk about, the government closest to the people is the one that typically governs best. And so I know that's a value that we all on council hold very dear. One of the other things that I've done in the last couple of weeks since the governor's announcement was, really spend a lot of time talking to people in the business and tourism communities to find out, a lot of what they felt about this whole thing. Now, first of all, I wanted to give major kudos to the overwhelming majority of our businesses in the city of Tempe. I have been everywhere from restaurants to grocery stores to other places selling goods and services. And every one of them that I went into in all different zip codes in the city of Tempe all still had signage on the door requiring masks. And so I wanted to say, even though there's been a couple of weeks of some uncertainty and some confusion about all of this, our business community has been very, very responsible and has really upheld public health guidelines. And so I wanted to say thank you and give them a big shout out this evening. One of the things, though, I wanted to concur with, though, is something that Councilmember Navarro said, which is what I've heard from a few business owners. As a matter of fact, one I just happened to meet with today, who said, earlier on, we felt that the city of Tempe was in charge of dealing with the enforcement issues, and we were free to do what we do best, which is sell goods and services to the public. We don't want to be in the enforcement business because that's not, frankly, why we went into business in the first place. The city is much more equipped to do that, and they were saying, and a number of them have said to me, it was easier when the city had a citywide mask mandate in place because at least, as Councilmember Cubie said, they could say, this is something that the city's doing. If you have an issue, take it up with the city. But the challenge has become, with some of the confusion that's ensued in the last couple of weeks due to the executive order, I've had a number of businesses sort of, say, look, it would be great if the city would really consider going back to the citywide mandate, because frankly, it would be much easier for us. We know we would have that enforcement mechanism in the case that someone comes into my business and chooses not to wear a mask. So that's something that I really appreciate Councilmembers Navarro and Cubie for raising. One of the other really interesting facts that I learned over the last 2 weeks is talking to folks in our tourism industry. So we're currently in the city of Tempe right now at a 76% occupancy rate for our hotels in the city of Tempe. At the same time last year, we were at 18%. We've gotten, I believe, largely to that number, the new number of 76%, because things are beginning to rebound, because COVID cases are beginning to decline and vaccination rates are going up. And the fact of the matter is a couple of issues with that. One, we're an economy that really relies a lot on conferences and meetings and tourism. And so what I know that people are doing, and they're calling a lot of our hoteliers, is saying, I would like to begin to book my conference here or a large meeting with my employees, but they're asking our local hotels, what is your mask policy? What are your social distancing policies? What other COVID mitigation strategies do you have in place? And so frankly, our tourism industry is able to market the fact that we are a safe city from a public health standpoint to land more of those meetings and more of those conferences. And that economy is key to our budget and frankly, being able to provide the services we do to all of our residents. Secondly, a lot of those hotels have talked about really wanting to staff up. now that we're back at 76% occupancy, they need to hire more people to actually service the folks who are coming and staying and eating in those hotels. And the challenge is, their concern is, though, if the mandates go away and the masks all come off and the COVID mitigation strategies cease, we could see another surge and another spike in COVID numbers, which means the same people they just hired 2 or 3 weeks ago, they would now have to talk about laying off. And so from a business standpoint, from tourism and business, there's a certainty, I think, that is attached to this, the fact that we are able to communicate to our public, but also to communicate to people even out of state as they're considering traveling here for business or leisure, that we have public health guidelines in place that ensure the health and well-being of travelers and people who are working for other companies. So I think that's critical. I think the thing for me, though, and I know I already asked my question about working, with ASU and working, with Maricopa County Public Health or University of Arizona. So I really appreciate staff's willingness to do that. The last thing I'll just say, though, on my end is that, for me, this is not, and I know for all of us here on this council, this is not a partisan issue. And unfortunately, what we've seen, in a lot of the national conversation and a lot of the dialogue that's taken place is it's become this sort of partisan issue, whatever, of Democrats and Republicans and independents. But to me, and I know to every single person on this council, and I don't often speak for the council, but I know I can in this situation, that is not important to us. Whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent, this decision is about protecting and preserving public health and well-being. And so from my perspective, it's looking for a solution that I believe is best for Tempe residents and our businesses, and even those looking to hold special events in the city of Tempe who are looking for more clarity and more certainty. This, from my perspective, the concept of reaffirming our mask mandate and keeping what we already have in place, that actually is providing more certainty to our businesses, and that is the right thing for our Tempe residents and business owners, especially what they've told me over the past 2 weeks. So that would be where I would go as well, is to reaffirm our existing mask mandate. With that, I see Councilmember Navarro's hand.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. No, I just want to add, and thank you for your comments. You're spot on, and I appreciate what you said. And probably to add to it, don't mess with my football season. Come fall, I want this thing to all be done. Have crowds, enjoy the fans, and enjoy ASU games and all that good stuff. So don't mess with football. Just do your thing.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councilmember Navarro. And I know your point is very well taken. I mean, I think that, and Vice Mayor Keating, I know, made this comment as well, that, that we are very close to getting to a place with the vaccination rates going up and the COVID-19 cases continuing to decline, not only in Maricopa County, but across the state, where we're getting to a place where we're really getting close. And I think if we just sort of stay this course a little while longer, we're going to get there in a very healthy and safe way, and football will be available to Councilmember Navarro and everyone else come this fall. Any other council members' comments or questions? All right, with that being said, the consensus of the council is to reaffirm the existing mask mandate that is already in place. So we will continue to have the mask mandate in the city of Tempe, and we will continue to have regular updates from staff regarding public health, whatever, so we can make determinations going forward and allow some flexibility. But for now, we are going to reaffirm tonight our commitment to having a mask mandate in place here in the city of Tempe. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and close this discussion and move on to item 2B, which is the housing inventory update, housing inventory and affordability analysis. Madam Clerk, any speaker or comment cards on this item?
Nothing for this item, Mayor.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and call upon LaVon Lamy to come give a presentation.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is Naomi Farrell, Human Services Director. This evening, Housing Manager LaVon Lamy and Matrix Design Group's Matt Schwab will present an update to the City of Tempe's 2017 Housing Inventory Analysis. The original 2017 study has been utilized over the past 4 years as a component for the development of the affordable housing strategies. Our intention is to use this updated analysis in much the same way. LaVon and Matt will present the objective of the housing inventory analysis, discuss a refinement made to its methodology, and review this year's findings. Staff is seeking confirmation on the described approach to develop future housing strategies and areas of additional research you would like to be included before finalization of report. With that said, I will turn this over to Levon Lamy to begin the presentation.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Levon Lamy. I manage housing services for the city of Tempe. As we're going through the overall housing inventory and affordability report, this is our second update. The first report, the first one was done in 2017. As we worked with Matrix Design Group in order to, through an RFP process, they were the successful respondent. They have over 20 years of real estate planning and development. They have 11 office locations, but one of the very interesting parts was they had offices in Phoenix, so they were very familiar with the current location and the local market. And coming back to this, with the original inventory conducted in 2017, Council Priority 4.09, which was to achieve a housing inventory ratio for affordable workforce and market rate housing categories that meets the recommendations made for a 3-person household in the most recent study. Because we did have a methodology change that will be discussed in much greater detail later in this presentation, we did provide the original baseline, which was the affordable workforce and market rate units, 2017 based on AMI or area median incomes. Our blend was 49, 34, and 16. Moving to the median family income percentages and calculations, this was recalculated back to the 2017 model and for our 2020 numbers. Because the methodology and baseline has been updated, we will be looking a little bit later after finalization and approval of this housing inventory to go in and update this specific council priority and strategy so that it more accurately represents the most current model and methodology. And I will be handing this over to Matt with Matrix to further elaborate.
Thank you, Levon, and thank you, Mr. Mayor and City Council. As we go through here, we're going to be talking about a lot of numbers, so feel free to stop and ask questions as we get to each slide. Sometimes I find out that it's a little bit easier to answer those questions, so feel free to raise your hand. So our objective, as Levon had talked about, was to update the 2017 study. And part of this study is we looked at affordable housing for the city of Tempe proper, right? So everything within the city boundaries. Then we compared those affordability rates to, or distributions, to the 4 zip codes internal to the city. And you can see here it's 85281, 282, 283, and 284. We also did this analysis and compared it to a 1-mile buffer from city boundaries. And then we also looked at some comparable regions, and that's Boulder, Colorado, Durham, North Carolina, and Provo, Utah. Next slide, please. So before we start talking about the numbers, the findings from this year's study, I want to just kind of spend a quick second on changes to the methodology that we've made. The last year, or the 2017 study, it used a little bit of a subjective approach to how they went about doing it. And by doing so, it was just, we were unable to replicate it exactly. And as such, it wouldn't necessarily be an apples to apples comparison. So because the city wants to use this study on an annual basis, or to update the study on an annual basis moving forward, Matrix recommended instituting a methodology that was developed by the Metropolitan Center at the Florida International University. And what that does is it utilizes American Community Survey data, which is generated by the U.S. Census Bureau. And what this does is it's a pure data exercise. So there is no subjectivity that's applied here by the analyst. It is the numbers are what they are, and they come directly from the Census Bureau. And so what this does is this allows us to provide a consistent and transparent approach, enabling apples to apples for future and past years. This particular study used a 2018 ACS 5-year estimates data. And this allows us, these 5-year estimates allows us to get to the zip code and census tract level. They don't provide it at the 1-year estimate, but they do at the 5-year. So we utilize those. And then of course, with the 5-year estimates, they have lower margins of error. So as the American Community Survey is just that, it's a survey, there's always margins of error. And so we're always looking at ways to minimize error in those survey work. And then of course, utilizing this methodology also gives us an apples to apples comparison across regions. So we think that moving forward, this is just a much better methodology to ensure consistency over the next coming years. Next slide, please. So getting into the findings of the study. So utilizing 2018 data, the median family income, and that is a statistic that is provided by the Department of Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, as many of you are familiar with. This is provided, these numbers, or this MFI is an annual income that is changed every 2 years, or every year, excuse me, but it's only provided for the MSA level. So that includes Maricopa and Pinell counties. And so for 2018, what this chart tells us or shows us, if you look at the first row where we see the income range, for Tempe, Arizona, the MFI was $69,100. Boulder was just shy of $109,000. Durham, North Carolina was just over $80,500. And Provo, Utah was slightly over $74,500. And then you can also see as you move down the table here, we have each of our income ranges. So we have 3 what we could consider affordable ranges, and that is 0 to 30% of MFI, 30 to 50% of MFI, 50 to 80% of MFI, and then we get into the workforce housing, which is considered 80 to 120% of MFI, market rate 120 to 200, and then those luxury rates are 200% of MFI and up. And then here you can just see here the maximum income level for each community and at each income range. Okay, next slide, please. And so here is just some top line findings from this year's study. So to the left, the graphic to the left just shows the changes in median family income from 2016 to 2018. There's a 10% increase, increasing from just shy of $63,000 a year to just over $69,000 a year. So it's a pretty healthy increase. It outpaced inflation, which is always a good thing. And then when we get to the second graphic, the graphic on the right, these are the top line findings for the affordability assessment. So starting at so if you look at the first stacked graph there, that's for Tempe, Arizona. And then Phoenix MSA is right next to that. And so what this graph is telling you is that 53% of all housing units in Tempe are within that affordable range. And that's, as we define it in the study, 0 to 80% of MFI. Moving up, there's 23% in the workforce, 17% in the market rate, and 7% at the luxury level. Now, when you compare that to MSA or to the Phoenix MSA, the Phoenix MSA has roughly 47% within the affordable range. So within Tempe city limits, given the median family income, Tempe has a greater proportion of its housing units within the affordable range compared to the Phoenix MSA. Now, as we continue to move across the slide deck here, we are now going to be comparing the zip codes within the city. And these are laid out in essentially geographical order. So 281 is at the northern end of the city and 284 is at the southern end. And there is a clear change in affordability rates as we move from north to south with the greater levels of affordable housing in the northern end surrounding ASU at 67% affordable. And then they begin to decline as you move south. 57% in zip code 282, 52% in 283, and then only 7% in zip code 284 are considered within the affordable range. So very clear pattern of development. As you move south, there tends to be more expensive housing units. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide is showing a comparison of the 2016 numbers with 2018 numbers and utilizing the same methodology. So we went back and we looked at 2016 and we employed the same methodology just to see what the apples to apples changes were. And there's not a lot of change, but the major change came at that second affordable rate, which is the 30 to 50%. So that's that second group of bar graphs moving in from left to right. And that's just slightly less than in 2016. And the gains in 2018 is if you look at the workforce 80 to 120 and the market rate 120 to 200, they gain slightly there. So compared to 2016, the housing stock is becoming less affordable, but only at the margins, only very slightly. Next slide, please. Okay, now this slide compares Tempe with the zip code levels. So the zip code levels, at the zip codes that we showed before, it didn't parse the entirety of the affordable range. So Tempe, Arizona is represented in blue, with each of the zip codes represented in their respective colors. Again, moving from north to south. And really the standout here is zip code 85284, that southern zip code as we mentioned before. It's clearly that the more expensive housing relative to the incomes in that area exists there. So there's just not a lot of affordable stock in that zip code. But as we mentioned, 85281 certainly has a greater propensity to have those affordable units. Okay, next slide, please. So now this compares the city of Tempe with its peer communities. So Boulder, Colorado, Durham, North Carolina, and Provo, Utah. Tempe being in blue again. And here, the big takeaway is two things, really. I think the most comparable community to Tempe is Durham, North Carolina. They tend to track in similar rates, not exactly, but similar in the affordability distribution. But Boulder, Colorado, you can see here, it's clearly a more expensive market. The housing units there are really geared more towards the luxury in the higher end of the pay scale there. And Boulder really is such a unique community, very different from Tempe, Durham, as well as Provo, Utah. Okay, next slide, please. Now, this next group that we're going to be talking about is just going to compare the city of Tempe with the surrounding region, or the 1 mile buffer region. And here you can see, and I apologize for the small print here, but you can see each of the regions that we grouped, and we grouped them by census tract. So this doesn't necessarily follow an exact 1 mile buffer, but what we did is we had our GIS folks identify what that 1 mile buffer was, all of the census tracts contained within that buffer. And in order to maintain statistical reliability, we opted to just stick with the whole census tracts. And what we did is we said, listen, if there's more than 25% of the land mass in a census tract within this 1 mile buffer, we'll include it in our analysis. And you can see here what the next slide, we're going to compare each of these regions. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so here's another bar graph. Again, Tempe is in the blue all the way to the left. So this is kind of an eye chart, and I understand that, but the big takeaways here are the East region, which is really has more of the affordable units. You can see here that there's a greater amount of 0 to 30, 30 to 50, and 50 to 80% compared to the other regions. And then the Southeast and the Southwest regions tend to be much more expensive in terms of the housing units relative to the incomes in those areas. And so with that said, Tempe really is kind of a unique, has a unique housing stock relative to its immediate surrounding regions. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is our last slide. And what this does here, this is kind of what's called a mismatch in the housing market. Now, it's not necessarily a supply and demand, but what we're saying here is if you look at that first table, the owner-occupied market for the city of Tempe, this is, if you look at the second column where it says owners, those are the numbers of units within each of the affordable income brackets. Those are the numbers of actual owners. The next column is the actual number of housing units that are within those affordable ranges. And then the final column where it says gap is really the deficit or the surplus of the housing there. And it's really just a mismatch. So if we look at, let's just say the affordable 50 to 80% row in the first table, and we look across there, we see that there's 715 owners that make an income that is within the 50 to 80% of MFI. However, there's 3,992 units that fall within that same affordability spectrum. So that gives us a surplus of 3,277 units within that affordability. Now, I want to caution as you interpret these numbers, this is it's not necessarily supply demand, and I wouldn't get hung up on the gaps. These numbers will never balance because there's always changes in the market. There's always incomes are going to change perhaps faster than the housing market can catch up. Sometimes housing values will outstrip the increase in incomes over time. So developers will never be able to precisely match owners versus the units, but it is an interesting metric to track over time just to see how the housing market is actually matching up to the local demand. If you go to the second table there, those are for renter-occupied units. And you can see here that in the renter-occupied, if you look at the gap column, the surpluses are really at the affordable level, which is good in terms of maintaining that affordability. But then there's some deficits when we look at the market rate in the luxury market. So the market rate really has that surplus deficit of about 11,190 units. So with that, I can hand it over to Levon, or I can open it up to questions from the council or you, Mayor.
Well, this is Levon. I'll hop in just as stepping back to the peer cities and the 1 mile buffer, looking at the peer communities and taking our position relative to theirs as far as housing blend was an effort that was developed in conjunction with some work we were doing with Bloomberg a few years ago, and being able to benchmark while Denver, Durham, they're reasonably sized communities with reasonably comparable universities. So being able to actually take a look and kind of see where we are relative to those communities. After having worked with the original housing inventory and using that in part of the discussion that came up, and part of what we had been looking at was what is the housing affordability or availability out within a 1 mile radius of the municipal boundaries, and being able to take a look at that to see if there were any major cliffs once you cross the city border. So coming back around, taking a look at everything and incorporating all of that, we have made sure that we have updated this based on what we learned from the first inventory moving into the second, while understanding that there are mismatches and there is still some work to be done in addressing affordable housing, especially for our most vulnerable populations with the extremely low income households, and then just making sure there is a reasonable blend so that folks who choose to live here have a unit available to be able to live here. And from that, we'll open it up for questions or comments.
Great, thank you so much, Levon. Thank you, Matt. I'm going to go to Councilmember Navarro.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Levon, Matt. I appreciate the study you guys done. This is absolutely perfect getting us engaged. But just for clarity, how do you rate us? I mean, just go over it again. How does Tempe look now? And obviously, I know that we always can make some better improvements. But how do we look now, in your opinion?
Was that a question for me or for Levon?
I'm sorry, for you.
Okay. Well, compared to Levon, can you go back one slide? Or I tell you what, go back to the first cluster slide where we look at the previous study. Keep going. There we go, right there. So there we go. So if we employ the same methodologies as was used, if we take the same methodology from 2018 and we go back and we look at the 2017 data, there hasn't been much movement. Now, 2 years, a lot can happen in 2 years, of course. Incomes can change, as we can see that. But in terms of the overall distribution, you're right around the same point as you were in 2016. Yes, there are some, you're creeping up more, you're becoming a little bit less affordable. You're moving more into the 80 to 20% in the workforce housing, and you're creeping up into the market rates a little bit higher. So your overall percentage of affordable units has declined slightly. But overall, those numbers are roughly the same. So I would say, you know, just only knowing the city's metrics over the study period, I would say that this community is continuing that where it was from 2016. So if the council and the city are happy with where they reside there, then I would say that you guys are continuing to work on that path. I would only suggest that you just keep an eye out for the upper end of the market, because the data does suggest that you're beginning to trend to that area.
And that's perfect. And then you when we talk about, you know, Tempe, but we talk about, you know, Levon brought up a mile radius outside of the outskirts of the city. And we look at those, just for clarity, and I got one more question, just for clarity, same thing, we're still not moving, we have affordability. So basically, what I'm trying to get to, and I think a lot of our residents are trying to understand too, and this is helpful for me because I want to make sure, are we trending the right way? Are we trending the wrong way? Have we not been trending? But overall, does Tempe provide a variety more so than our surrounding cities or those comparative cities that you talked about nationally? Are we just stagnant, or are we mixed very well?
Well, now in terms of unit mix, with respect to affordability, I believe that you all are. And if you go back go back one slide, Levon, please. So if you compare the affordability in Tempe with Phoenix, you know, now Phoenix is a much larger market, as you all know. It is a a commuter's destination. So there's a variety of income levels, there's a variety of housing stock there. But when you look at the affordability relative to the incomes, Tempe is tracking much better. You know, you're up, you know, you've got 6%, you have a 6% greater affordable stock than does the Phoenix MSA. So I would suggest that as Tempe is, you know, essentially in the heart of the MSA, that Tempe is doing very well. And one of the things that we noticed just looking at the data is that it tends to be a renter-heavy destination, and that's primarily driven by ASU. And so developers understand that market very well, and so they try to target to the younger college students. Not to say that all the college students are traditional. I'm sure there's a lot of non-traditional students in the city as well. But I do believe that Tempe is doing a much better job than the broader Phoenix area in terms of affordability. Okay. Now one thing to really pay attention to, though, moving forward, is where those income levels, the trend of the income levels, because if the income levels drop, say next year, over the next couple of years, say there's a recession, who knows what's going to happen, then that very well could change your affordability mixture. But I guess the one silver lining behind that is that it'll also do the same thing for Phoenix MSA. It'll also more than likely do the same thing for the peer communities. So where you stack up against them, say in an economic downturn, it really may still be relatively the same, if that makes sense.
No, I think it does. I think when you have a diverse community, you can withstand a little bit more of the storm, so to speak. So I agree with that. Now, this is absolutely perfect. I mean, this is the stuff that we, with our residents, given this information, where we stand, how we stand, guiding us as development does come in. Obviously, let's continue that bang of affordability. If we're seeing that trend of need is there, how do you mix that blend? We talk about, as you said, North Tempe versus South Tempe, and incomes going up. Is that conversation of where does that affordability lie? Because if you concentrate too much in one area of town, that's where you continue to have economic problems or other situations that might arise. So it's kind of the placement, and spreading out that placement is what we try to strive for. So I appreciate those comments for sure.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Navarro. Next up, let's go with Councilmember Garland.
Hi, thank you so much. And Matt, I appreciate this information that you gave. I was kind of shocked when I was reading through the notes, some of the numbers that that you came up with, just because I had not seen it in this form before. So I appreciate you giving that information to us. So my question is, I know that I think it was in the 2040 plan that there was numbers in there that talked about the type of housing that we were, and the amount of housing in certain areas that we were going to need looking forward to the future into Tempe as our population grows. Does this take into consideration what we are doing to look forward as far as how many people that we need to be looking at housing and in what income levels we need to be looking at them?
No, so a great question, and that's always an important component of any housing plan. This study does not look at that, unfortunately, because the way that the Census Bureau, there's always a lag in census data, right? It takes time for them to do their surveys, collect it, and then organize it, and then put it up on their website. So it is a lagging indicator. So that is one of the weaknesses of this. So I can't tell, it doesn't show trends moving forward. The only trend that it'll show is between 16 and 18. And as I did mention, there is a slight uptick in more of the more expensive product relative to incomes. Now, where that puts you in 2040, I couldn't tell you. We'd have to look at those demographic projections and go from there. But that's not something we considered in this study.
Okay, and then the numbers, when you looked at it by breakdown by zip code, and you see that the most affordable workforce housing is in 85281. And Councilmember Navarro was just talking about the mixture of those affordable housings and the luxury houses. It should be a mixture in the community. There shouldn't be heavy on either side. Is there recommendations that you have for us to be able to look at doing a little bit more of a mix? I mean, I'm looking at 85284, and there's a huge difference between that and 85281.
Yeah. In my opinion, and a faulty with one of the data analysis is that we don't have an opportunity to talk about preferences. We don't survey individual households, so we don't know preferences, but we do know incomes relative to costs. So I agree with you that a product mix is keeping a relative balance of product mix is important, because you do tend to, Councilman Navarro made a great point, that if all of your affordable housing stock is in one zip code or one region, you don't get even economic development, right? But because ASU is driving this, in my opinion, ASU is really driving 281 and to a lesser extent 282. Developers know that market very well, and they understand what the price points they have to hit. And so I think that they're just realizing that if they want to rent out homes or rent out apartments in particular, they just got to hit a lower price point that students can afford. And so I think it's natural to see more affordable units clustered around universities.
Okay. Well, I appreciate it, Matt. Thank you so very much. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Garland. Next up, I'm going to go to Councilmember Cubie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and Matt, thank you for your presentation. I'm wondering if my colleagues in Durham have that information to send them a report and save them some money, but I don't want to get into your business. But there are a lot of commonalities with Durham, so I appreciate using that as a city. When will the 2020 data be available? Because as you mentioned, this is lagging indicator.
Yeah. Yeah, 2019 data actually became, so at the 5-year estimates, it always takes a couple years for that to happen. So 2019 data was just released in January of this year. Unfortunately, we started the analysis in October this year, and we were trying to hit a couple deadlines. So so this year, so 2020 data will then be available next January.
Great, thank you. And I realize, I mean, I want to just, add some more cautionary notes as you did about this data, because you can read it in a very superficial way and saying, oh, Tempe's doing well. We're lagging a little bit, but we're on the right path. But in fact, when you look in the future, we always have to plan for the future. Our decisions that we make impact generations to come. We need to look at where the lags will be. And I think from our baseline study, and I could be wrong, and Levon could correct me, that we are expected to have a lag, or we need to fill 11,000 affordable housing, not positions, 11,000 affordable homes or apartments in the next 20 years. So it's really important that you use this data and use the predictive and projective data as well. And it's also the point to be made, if we do have a certain amount of affordable housing stock, the most important way to keep people from being housing insecure is to make their housing secure, which means to continue to revitalize homes and renovate homes and provide funding for those that can't afford to renovate their homes. Because if things deteriorate, then it's going to be ripe for development and more gentrification. So it's so important with housing insecurity to focus on keeping people in their homes in the first place. Isn't that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree. And I would also add one other thing there is quality employment too, right? And working on incomes, improving incomes, increasing incomes, education levels, all those things, and not importing that from the surrounding regions, but doing that internally, right? Because to your point about gentrification, you don't want to push out your local populations, but you want to raise, the rising tide rises all boats, right, as they say. And so I think that's for developers, and I'm not speaking for any individual developers, but we work with a lot of them, and they tend to chase profits, right? That's what they go after. And I think there can be very smart policies put into place that can incentivize developers to focus on affordable housing. And it's not easy. Most communities struggle with this, as I'm sure you all know. And so it just requires some creative policies.
And also looking toward the future, we see growing income inequality, and a static study like this show what the impacts on housing might be for growing income inequality in our region, in our city. And that's, and we know with possible evictions that are coming after the eviction moratorium takes place, could have another, that could be another pressure point, another punctuation point in this plan that we have, or experience that we have with affordable housing in our city. So I just want to reaffirm, we're hoping to increase our affordable housing picture in our city, that we're making very slow progress, and there's a lot of reasons for that, but we can't stop, because if we just allow the status quo to continue, we're going to end up with this huge gap. And so we have to be constantly pushing and pushing and pushing, because even when we do these projects, they barely make a dent. So that's why it's important not to take this data as evidence that we're doing well and we're fine and we don't have to push forward, but that we really need to double down and look at every possible way to keep people in their homes who are currently in affordable and workforce homes, and then also to increase the stock of affordable and workforce housing in our city. So I just wanted to get that across. And thank you so much for your presentation, and look forward.
Thank you, Council Member. And I will just say this too, that as more of these studies take place, there'll be more historic data that we can compare to. So those trends will begin to kind of make themselves known.
Thank you.
QB, this is Levon. I just wanted to hop in on the 11,000. Yes, that is correct. We did need at least 11,000 units of affordable to be created as we move forward. In looking at the data, we are intending to do an update to this housing inventory on an annual basis so that we are, I understand we're going to be a year behind, but at least we'll be as close to current as possible with a full inventory done once every 5 years, so that we have reasonably current information to then do the forward looking and make reasonable decisions with.
And that's great to know. And I'm really proud that the city that we adopted an affordable housing impact statement, AHIS, modeled after the city of Atlanta, so that we can keep track when a development comes in. At the first point of contact, we can see what the impact of that particular development is on our affordable housing picture. We can't use it as we can use it as a tool, an observational tool. We can't use it to deny a project. There are a lot of other factors that come into whether we approve or deny a project, but at least we can keep track that way and keep our data fresh and know where we are as we head towards our audacious goal. So thank you so much. Thank you, Levon.
Thank you, Councilmember Cubie. Next up, Councilmember Adams.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Matt, I want to thank you for this incredible presentation. You really did a good job breaking everything down so we can get a true vision of how we're doing on our affordable housing and our housing in general. So thanks to you for this. I would like to see projections for the next 10 years, if you guys can kind of work your magic and see. I know it won't be a exact science, but if you can put together some projections for the next 10 years, I think that would be really helpful. And I just want to thank you for the presentation. Just really, really, really a good overview of where we are. So take care.
Councilmember Adams, this is Levon. If I may ask a clarifying question, would you like that 10-year projection included as part of the overall inventory or as a later appendix to the inventory?
I would like it included as overall inventory.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilmember Adams. Any other council members' comments or questions for Matt or Levon? All right. Hearing none, just wanted to thank Matt and Levon for the presentation. Really appreciate it. The only thing I really wanted to kind of add before we wrap up is I really would like to sort of explore the idea of either updating the measure or including additional measures that would really kind of comprehensively capture our ecosystem of affordable housing and financial freedom for individuals in our community. That's a really important thing. I know right now the Office of Strategic Management and Diversity is currently working on some of those initiatives, and I'm wondering, Levon, if there's some way that maybe you could kind of team up with them to kind of expand a little bit on some of those measures, but also talk about how we connect all of this to financial freedom to make sure that there really is true equity across the city of Tempe.
Absolutely, Mayor. We'll be happy to.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Those were all the comments that I had. Any other council members, comments or questions? All right, hearing none. Thank you so much, Levon. Thank you, Matt. Really appreciate it. Next up, we're going to have the Clark Park Pool and improvements update. Madam Clerk, any comments from the public received on this item?
No submissions for this item, Mayor.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and call upon Sean Wagner to begin the presentation.
Thank you, Mayor Woods. Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Awesome. It's great to see everyone here tonight. And again, always appreciate the opportunity to come back before City Council and provide these project updates. So tonight we're going to be talking about Clark Park and our progress here. And what we're looking for is just to give you an update on the public engagement, because we've completed that part of the process here, and we've developed a preferred concept design not only for the aquatic improvements, but also for the park layout. And at the end of this presentation, we truly appreciate any council feedback on the preferred concept plan, including any questions you may have about public or stakeholder engagement. So as with all of our projects, we really want to hone in and make sure we're supporting the strategic priorities of the city. And in this case, we really feel that the quality of life performance measures where this project fits, specifically into our performance measures of 3.16, which really dial into the quality of our city parks and recreation centers. And that includes our amenities and parks as well too, just so we're on this. That's playgrounds, fields, all those types of things. That's really what 3.16 encompasses here. 3.17 really talks to the quality of our community services programs, which thousands of residents partake in during non-pandemic times, but we've been able to continue with them virtually over the last year and been thankful for that, and really looking forward to the time that we can slowly start to engage responsibly with in-person programming again. So our project consultants, and I'm joined tonight by our lead consultant, Brandon Skobiak, and he's with Dig Studio. And Brandon leads a team comprised of Holly Street Studio as well as Aqua Design. And before I move on from here, I want to just briefly highlight, Craig Hayden and the Park CIP team have also been instrumental in this process. We have been doing this alongside of each other, and they're a part of this internal technical team that we have. And it also includes Neighborhood Services, Shauna Warner, and Melissa Quillard over in our PIO office. Again, this engagement with the community is critical, and we truly value the input and the feedback that we receive, and we really couldn't do it without all of the supporting hands as it comes when it comes to our projects. So tonight, Brandon's going to be taking over the presentation here in a minute, but we're going to go over the community engagement on this third round of that we just completed. And again, like I said before, we're really going to get into that preferred concept design, and that really drills down into the park layout. You're going to see some concepts on the play area or the playground and some of the remodel work that we'll be doing, as well as a recreation center and the aquatic development that's there as well too. And then towards the end here, we'll go over next steps. And by all means, if you have questions, feel free to get my attention. We'll be happy to answer them. But there's always an opportunity at the end for those as well. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Brandon Skobiak with Dig Studio.
Perfect. Thank you, Sean. And thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council, for the opportunity to be here again with you all. So this is an update. We were with you back in November, where we had a couple of alternatives for both the park and the pool that we had brought to the community and then brought to Council for feedback. And from that feedback, it has been developed into a preferred alternative. So Sean, next slide. So in terms of community engagement, just to kind of refresh the history of that. It started out with a listening session back in, multiple listening sessions back in September, October, and then from there developed some concepts for both the pool and the park layout, went back to the community in November, gathered further input on those various alternatives that we'll review this evening. And that ultimately led, along with your commentary and your feedback from the council presentation, to preferred design alternatives. That preferred design alternative was presented to the community February 9th again with a 2-week online comment period to gather further kind of feedback on the project. Next slide. So in addition to the feedback that was received in the fall on the various options, other considerations that we took into account as we move the plans forward were obviously budget, looking at kind of a value analysis for the various master plan and aquatic program iterations, long-term planning, understanding that parks and program fluctuate over time, and so how do we create the most flexible and best framework for the park moving forward. Site sensitivity was also important, understanding that this area is within an area of archaeological concern. We have an archaeological consultant on the team just to help us understand potential impacts. And then also understanding how to best utilize existing infrastructure of the site. This ties in a little bit to budget and also kind of park experience and making sure that we're designing responsibly and understanding the accessible routes that are there and how to take best advantage of those. Next slide. All right, so here's where we were back in November with kind of the two park alternatives at the overall master plan or concept plan level. And ultimately, this was kind of narrowed down to a decision on whether the garden stays within its current location or whether the garden is relocated into the northeast corner of the park and the pool is put back into kind of its historic location. Overall, the commentary by the community was extremely positive that the garden had a life kind of beyond this project and that it was kept within the park. I think from the very first community outreach meetings, we understood the value and the importance of that to the neighborhood. And so from there, it really ultimately came down to those other considerations of budget, site sensitivity, and how the project would kind of live long term. And so ultimately the Great Lawn concept moved forward in terms of being able to take advantage of existing parking layouts and adding a couple of spots without much impact at all to the park space, taking advantage of existing infrastructure, and then providing the garden with an opportunity to kind of create their own environment and new space to fully function for them. Next slide. So here's the preferred alternate advancement. And so you can see the pool, and we'll get into the design details of the actual aquatic facility in a moment, but the pool finds its location in the southeast corner of the site, apologies, by the existing parking area, which is expanded slightly, basically made more efficient to accommodate the new program. The baseball field is left as is. There'll be infield improvements along with this project. And then you can see in the northeast corner of the site, the garden is relocated. Along with that relocation, we are and have had several stakeholder meetings with that group to understand the needs and desires of what that new space can become. And it will include moving and relocating some of the existing Ramada art features, et cetera. And then a major component of this project is really within the park enhancements of the Ramadas, which are essentially located on the site, both upgrading E in terms of the aesthetics and the lighting, and looking at Ramada replacement towards the center of the park, and then pulling that playground south so it has better visual access, feels safer, and can really create kind of this community hub right in the center of the park that's accessible from both McKemmy and Roosevelt and 19th, and then the alleyway as well, knowing that that's a major kind of pedestrian thoroughfare. And then the replacement of the existing restroom F with a new restroom facility that serves the dog park, baseball field, et cetera. You'll also notice some dashed lines on the plans. Through this 15% preliminary design process, we've identified kind of what we're calling these ad alternates. As we get more information on budget and as we get some cost numbers in, we can understand the value of these different moves. But the thought is if the courts could relocate, especially the basketball court, over to that west side of the park, it would further activate that area. And everybody knows more activity in more areas of the park is better for safety and security. Also has a nice relationship with the existing restroom and the existing Ramadas, but also opens up a larger community lawn area north of the building that's labeled Recreation Center and Pool House. And just to spend a moment on the Recreation Center and Pool House, this will be a combination building that will increase the recreation program square footage from what's out there today in combination with the pool house. And so the pool house faces south towards the aquatic facility, and the recreation center will be designed in a very kind of transparent north face that really engages the garden and the park. Next slide. Just a little bit on accessibility and improving circulation throughout the park. That was an interesting thing just from immediate conversations or early conversations. The simple act of just strolling through the park was one of the most desired programs. And so understanding that things needed to be connected was a high priority. We will also be working with the City of Tempe Planning on understanding, parking requirements within the park with these new facilities coming in. But the strategy right now is to take a very low impact, kind of a low take on the open space and really focus on creating efficient parking and use of existing infrastructure. Next slide. So play area development, this is a portion that will be continued to be developed with the neighborhood going forward. There are several neighborhood outreach meetings that will still be planned going on in the future, looking at equipment types, age ranges, that sort of thing. At the 15% kind of concept design level, really what we're looking at is how it integrates and stitches into the park, and also how it can become this kind of vibrant, very celebratory place for the community that reflects Clark. Just by driving through that neighborhood, just by walking through that neighborhood, seeing all the installations and the roundabouts, being at the garden, seeing the vibrancy that's there, we really feel that that can be something that's pulled through and be this thread that kind of ties everything together within the park, whether it be the new aquatic facility, whether it be the new garden relocation, or whether it be the playground. And so this theme is showing how playground can take that garden inspiration and bring it to life, and bring some color, while also being very functional in terms of creating a very exploratory play area. The other thing that this location shows is integration with the existing tree canopy. It is our goal on the project to preserve and protect all of the healthy trees on site. So that's what you see in these images. And one way to take most advantage of those is to actually try to get people to occupy the shade areas that they provide. Next slide. So in terms of the aquatic development, next slide, we had 3 conceptual plan options that we spoke to yourself, Mayor, and Council. Back in November, we got very concise feedback from the stakeholders and the community. The family retreat was loved because of this a little bit softer form and this focus on creating more of this neighborhood destination that catered to this kind of range of ages. So we wanted to pull that forward. The health and wellness, there was some concern with integrating a warm water pool, especially within our climate. But the structure of the lap lanes is something that those that were more concerned about fitness and were concerned about swim clubs really did see as a positive in both that and the destination. And then finally in the destination, it was awesome. So these Word documents of just laundry lists of all these responses that are fun to read through. But every single kid, teenager, picked the destination as the one that they wanted because of this water slide. And we heard it from the parents loud and clear that does help expand the age range and the capture range for these facilities. So I think it's something that we wanted to pull forward as well. Next slide. So in the development of the aquatics, you can see a switch from the pool house and the rec center where it was going north-south before. It's been reoriented east-west to better engage with the park and the aquatic facility and have better kind of solar orientation as well. But what this did is it kind of reoriented the pool as as we went forward. And we took kind of the best of each of the 3 and combined them into a preferred alternative going forward. So this has the softness of the family retreat as you move west towards the park, with lots of areas to picnic, a beach entry with water play, but it still integrates this formality of the lap lanes that can be expanded up to 6, 8-foot lanes that can host swim clubs during different times of the season. So it can be very functional and serve purpose for fitness buffs, as well as kind of those family Saturday afternoons. And then you can see on the bottom a water slide, and it's a unique water slide. It actually does not run out to a pool. It's a I'm blanking on the name of it. It's basically a run out slide. So water is held within, so it can be placed on the deck. And what we thought in terms of its placement to the south is it becomes a beacon from that 19th Avenue and Roosevelt intersection. That is kind of that wow moment. And if you're a kid, you see that you want to go there immediately. So next slide. So this is where we are in the project. Like I mentioned, public engagement started early October. We had our last public meeting of the master plan phase back in February 9th, meeting with you all today to get feedback on preferred design alternatives, and then we'll be moving forward in the design process this summer. And I'll pass it over to John.
Thanks, Brandon. And again, thanks, Brandon, for joining me tonight. Really appreciate it. And so yes, moving forward, we would anticipate developing those construction plans at the beginning of the next fiscal year. So again, and I'm remiss and I apologize to Barrett and his team, because engineering has been instrumental as well throughout this process and will continue to be so, especially during the development of the construction plans and the actual construction. Their insight is always proven valuable. So we then anticipate beginning construction the following fiscal year. And as we see it now, that construction could take anywhere from 18 months, a year and a half to 2 years. But we really won't know what that looks like until we're actually able to get into these construction plans and really nail down the final plans. So at this point, we appreciate the time that you provided us tonight and would be happy to answer any questions or take any comments that you have as it relates to Clark and the improvements we're going to be doing here very soon.
Excellent. Thank you, Sean. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Brandon. I'm going to go to Councilmember Adams.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. First of all, this presentation was wonderful. I really like what you've done with Clark Park. It's going to completely transform the entire community. So good job on that. And second is I would like us to consider pickleball courts in Clark Park. And unfortunately, we're only, I think, at 20%, 15 or 20% design. So that's helpful. But maybe perhaps where the alternate volleyball courts or basketball courts or wherever you think it might make sense, the most sense, but to do consider that, because I know at the Tempe Sports Complex, we have those pickleball courts that are full all the time. And I think it would be nice to have pickleball courts at Clark Park. I've gotten this feedback from some residents in the area, so I just wanted to push that forward. So thank you. Great presentation. Great job. I'm so excited to see it open. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Adams. Councilmember Cubie.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councilmember Adams. You've been such a champion of this project from the very beginning, and so I really want to salute you for that, and thank you. I just had a question about the construction. You say July 2022, so when will the existing facilities be demolished? Like there's the rec center there, and then the present-day garden. Will there be a time where they're just, that you could give me that's for sure, or is it all just in the plans?
So the construction includes the demolition. The construction chart includes the demolition of the existing facilities, and we're working with Morgan from TCAA in the garden, just to try to minimize the interruption there, but understanding that there might be a slight interruption to a growing season or a planting season, while keeping that eye on finding that long-term home now for the garden, and really excited about being able to provide that. So we do need to get in and work this. Right now, we're looking at this as being, we're going to bring in the construction manager early in the process so that we can talk through some of these items to ensure we really minimize any downtime for the garden. And we're really also prioritizing for those amenities like the baseball field and some others, that we keep those open so that the community can still continue to use that park.
And I imagine there's green construction codes that are adopted by the city of Tempe that we would be building along with that code.
So yes, we've allocated for sustainability features. We've been working with the Sustainability Commission as well as Dr. Braden Kay, just to make sure that we identify opportunities for that, whether that's being able to take advantage of some of the materials that we can do, as well as I'll say pre-plumbing for additional amenities down the road should some additional funding become available if we can't afford some other aspects when it comes to sustainability.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Cubie. One quick question I'm going to ask my colleagues here. Councilmember Adams made the suggestion about including pickleball as part of the programming at Clark Park. I'm just curious what people think about that. I see Councilmember Arredondo Savage's hand, so I'm going to go to her, but just want to make sure I get consensus on that item before we close this. So, but Councilmember Arredondo Savage.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that. Sorry for my tardiness here today. And you know what? I love pickleball. I'm over at pickleball as much as I can, and have enjoyed playing pickleball in our courts. Sean, you're going down next time. That's all I gotta say. But yeah, I mean, I'm always, I think, looking for opportunities. But I really do respect the community process and where we've come to date too. So you know what that looks like and what has already been vetted through. I certainly understand that and appreciate what that input is. But you know, if there's possibilities to do that, that's great. But my question was, And I kind of noticed this because I have a nephew that is playing baseball, and I'm realizing, you know, especially when we go to Gonzo Field, parking is really tough. And I really want to ensure that when we're utilizing this baseball field too, and now that we're going to have these really awesome amenities, that parking is going to be adequate. Because if you think about it, you got baseball, you probably got what, 15 kids on a team, 2 teams, and the coaches. I mean, you're talking 30, 40 cars just when you have a baseball game. So I know I thought I saw the slide that said you have 45 plus the 15, and I didn't know if there's possibilities to maybe think about what that might look like, even along like 19th Street, just not being in the way, but if there's still, I can't remember if parking is still there. I believe there is. Not necessarily that's where we want people to park, but there is the ability to park there, right, Sean? Is that
Yes. Yeah, you can park along 19th Street.
Okay, cool. And so I really do appreciate you moving the parking spaces over off of Roosevelt that way. I mean, that's just so much more conducive, I think, to putting people in there, and that makes complete sense to me. So I'm stoked about this idea. I mean, it was really about 3 years ago. I took a yoga class in that building. It is time for that building to come down. So yes, I'm 100% on board, and really do appreciate the work and the outreach that you guys have done, not only in your department, but also in you know, our neighborhoods too, and everything that they do. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Arredondo Savage. Councilmember Garland.
Hi, thank you, Mayor. Sean, I love this design, and as Councilmember Arredondo Savage said, I like the outreach, and when you guys did provide the information for us to be able to read some of the comments, they were a lot of fun to read. I really, honestly, I enjoyed that so much. So thank you for allowing us to be able to take part and read it that also. I just have a weird question about trees. So will we be adding trees? I'm sure we will be. And are we working with Richard Atkins to come up with the tree idea and tree canopy and the best shade coverage we could get on these properties?
So to answer your second part of your question there, and then I'll defer to Brandon, it is yes, we're working with Richard Atkins. He's a part of Craig Hayton's team, who is my partner on this project as well too. So yes, we'll be working with Richard Atkins as it relates to our urban forest, and that was part of too the plan is to save those existing trees, and there was input and dialogue with that, really recognizing those the benefits of the mature canopy, and then introducing some new trees that then help to replace as things start to reach their life cycle. It's not all at once. But Brandon, do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, you did a good job. Yeah, there's this kind of successionary planning of tree growth and understanding the irrigation systems that are out there, right? So this is a unique opportunity where you have a flood irrigated park that's going to remain that way. So understanding the species that go with that is critical. However, when we get around the recreation center and pool house, it'll be a little bit different palette that is more drip appropriate when we start kind of regrading and doing things within that area. But short answer is yes, we will be adding trees as part of this project. And yeah, we have a relationship with Richard and have worked with him in the past and look forward to continuing that.
Great, I appreciate that. It's nice to hear that you're going to keep the old growth trees too, because those are so important in a community. So thank you both very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilmember Garland. Councilmember Cubie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to circle back, and this isn't necessarily a question for Brandon or Sean, but for staff. But I know there have been a lot of concerns in the community off Roosevelt about the lack of sidewalks, and mostly I think north of Clark Park. And given that this project is going to have a lot of pedestrian interest, is there, you know, there's a cascading impact. You build this beautiful facility. Are we going to also be timing to build the sidewalks on Roosevelt? And again, I don't expect you to answer that. Maybe we could just hear from staff in a Friday packet or some other time about what that plan is.
We'll follow up, and just so I'm clear on that, Councilmember Cooper, is we do have planned, obviously, sidewalk running north-south along the parking that's just off of Roosevelt. So are you referring more to the street side of Roosevelt so that I can follow up?
Yeah, no, I'm pretty much north of the park. There's a substantial area that doesn't have a sidewalk at all. And there have been neighbors that have been really advocating for that for years. And it's somewhere in the process, but I didn't know because we're developing the aquatic feature, whether, and developing the park, whether that sidewalk project would take on increased priority.
I will follow up. We'll touch base, circle around internally with engineering transportation and find out where that project is in the timeline. And we'll have some discussions and follow up with a council packet update.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Cubie. Okay, great. Thank you, Sean. Also, it's one of the, go back to Councilmember Arredondo Savage.
Sorry, Mayor, just one thing I didn't really, one thing I think we need to consider is if we do move forward with the pickleball court, because I think, Councilmember Brown's brought up a really great point. The one thing is with pickleball, it's kind of loud and we're really close to neighbors. So I would really be a little bit of concern about that. But if we do move forward and there's a possibility to do that, I totally think that that you guys within the Parks and Recreation, their master plan, could determine the best place to make that happen. So I just wanted to throw that out there, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Arredondo Savage. And I'll say as well, just really quickly, I support the idea of adding pickleball to the Clark Park plan. And right, as Councilmember Arredondo Savage, in an appropriate place where it's clearly not going to disturb the neighbors, but allow people to have fun and in their own and playing a little pickleball off to the side, I guess. So, Councilmember Adams.
Just to clarify, I know that it was brought up about community input, and this was community input that I received, so that's why I'm bringing up pickleball in the first place. So thank you. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Garland?
I did not mention that I also support the idea of pickleball if you can find a place to put it. So I just want to make sure I said that. And I want to know if it's really loud at pickleball because of Councilmember Robert Arredondo Savage, or is it just typically that people play and they're kind of loud?
Back up.
Wow. Wow. It's gonna be a problem. We start having meetings in person again because of comments like those, Councilmember Garland. Well, and thank you, Councilmember Garland. And with that too, the pickleball idea has and that's consensus on that to move forward. Let's see here. Craig Hayden.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. And if we could maybe on the pickleball item, Sean and I are going to be back in 2 weeks with our draft Parks and Rec master plan that's really going to outline additional amenities and really some key next steps. So we'd love to maybe tether to 2 conversations really around that level of service update, which includes pickleball and really what our approach will be moving forward. We'd love to take some direction at that time, but just leave it open as an option if we'd like to just present at that point if we can take some direction there as well and really look at kind of what we're planning and hoping to do holistically to look at amenities and as we add them in the future, something like pickleball.
That sounds good to me.
Thank you very much, Mayor.
Let's see. Councilmember Adams, was that a residual hand or a new one?
Residual.
All right.
Sorry about that, Mr. Mayor.
No worries. Want to make sure I'm calling on everyone. Any other council members?
You're doing great.
Thank you. Any other council members? Any comments or questions on this item? Hearing none. Sean, do you feel like you have enough direction to go forward?
We do, and I appreciate it. Thank you, Mayor and City Council.
Great. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Craig. All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Next up here, we have item 2D, which is Rio Salado Park programming. Madam Clerk, any comments received on this item?
None for this item, Mayor.
All right. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and call upon Keith Burke to start the presentation.
All right. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Keith Burke, Community Services Director. And tonight we are excited to bring you information in reference to our special events programming down at the Rio Salado Park, specifically at Tempe Beach Park and the ancillary areas around the lake, North Linear Park, Arts Park, and Giuliano Park. So we're really excited to bring the team together tonight, and I'll go ahead and kick it over to Sean Wagner as he's going to start the process of discussing a new implementation plan for evaluating events in and around the downtown. So I'll go ahead and let Sean take it over. Sean?
Appreciate it, Keith, and thank you, and long time, Mayor, Council. Seems like just a couple of minutes ago. So tonight I'm joined by a great team of, spearheaded here too by, 3 organizations, City of Tempe being one, and Linda Cano, our special events manager. I'm also joined tonight by Kate Borders with the Downtown Tempe Authority and Brian McCartan with Tempe Tourism. So just really quick, the purpose of the presentation tonight is we really want to seek your support for an initiative that I think we've all been kicking around for a little while. And that's this: how can we infuse new events in and around the Rio Salado Park and Town Lake? So what we've really honed in on for this particular aspect of this is looking at the application process. So we're going to just talk that over with you tonight. And ultimately, we're hopeful that this application process, this new application process that we're going to look at implementing, would bring more diverse and robust programming that not only supports, the community, but also, our local businesses, and brings in tourism, so that we're really getting that energy and that vibe back and continuing to grow what we started just over 20 years ago when we started doing events down at Town Lake. So again, the performance measures we really feel we're honing in on here are quality of life, where we get at the value of special events. And we're not just talking about economic value, but there's also a community value, of just being in and around that vibe, that culture, that spirit that cultivates, in this case, our downtown and our Rio Salado Park area. In addition to that, we really know that the two are tied together, and that's the financial stability and vitality. And we're looking at 5.01 here and how we support our local businesses. And we really feel that these two performance metrics, these strategies here, really fit best with the presentation we're going to do this evening. So just a real quick background, as I had already mentioned, this is a collaborative approach with some of our community partners, and we're very excited to have them on board. But just a real quick background, we're going to cover some of the goals, and then we'll get into just defining what is Rio Salado. It's not just Beach Park, spoiler alert. Then we're going to get into some of Linda's going to start talking about the process and the timeline, and then, as always, we'll go into our next steps. And along the way, please, let us know if you've got some questions. We'd love to hear them on that slide, or there'll be time at the end, once again, for you to add in your comments and questions at that time. So as I just mentioned, with the background here, we started just over 20 years ago, and it was a really let's program this area, let's make it active, let's just energize this. And staff at the time did a tremendous job at that. They went out, they recruited, as well as tourism, as well as the Downtown Tempe Authority. We really wanted to activate that area. But that's led to now what we have, and it's a great problem to have, is we just get so many requests, we can't accommodate them all. And we've had some activities or events that have been there for quite some time as well too. And is there a way to change those things up? Would they do better perhaps in another part of the city? That's all a part of this, but that's part of this whole first right of refusal that we have in place now, rather than looking at the merits of the event and its impacts. Both from a community standpoint and a financial standpoint. It's just, if you have the data, it's yours the next year, and it stays that way. So we really think we're at a time where we can evolve that process and really improve upon it to infuse just a new lifeblood with the events, as well as our downtown community. And we really, like I mentioned a little earlier, we do think that this limits some of the new and innovative programming that we really feel that council supports. We've heard it in a lot of different work study sessions and council meetings, and we really want to be able to capitalize on that. So with the growth that we have and where we're at now, we're really excited about where we can go, and looking forward to get there. So what are those goals that we're looking at accomplishing? Of course, we want to increase that diversity of programming, both with those smaller activations as well as our larger events. Those are things that we want to make sure we do. So continue that community focused on those activities and those placemaking initiatives. Make just more robust use of the area. It doesn't just always have to be the large events. We can program different areas of the park, of Rio Salado Park and the downtown, and really, again, create these series of destinations as you visit downtown Tempe. It's now a residential area, and so we've got quite a bit of residential development in addition to the business that's been developed in and around the lake. And we need to be able to try to balance that everyday use with the special events. And how do we do that? That's one of our goals. That's one of those things we want to be able to work with the community with. Obviously, encouraging tourism and continuing to expand opportunities that have a positive impact are a priority as well. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Brian McCartan, and he's going to talk to us a little bit more about the impacts of tourism and how it supports our downtown and the Rio Salado Park area.
Well, thank you, Sean, and good evening, Mayor Woods and members of the council. You know, I've had the opportunity to discuss with you in the past, and I've truly appreciated your support and understanding of the importance of tourism to the success and livelihood of Tempe. You know, a strong tourism industry is essential to our community. The 4 million visitors a year that Tempe attracts spend $851 million in our community. And visitor spending generates $83 million in state and local taxes, which saves the average Tempe household about $1,200 per year. So, you know, tourism sustains 1 in 14 Tempe jobs with $351.5 million in earned wages. Major events are the largest tourism draw for Tempe, and so securing tourism value economic impact is vital to our community. So it's important to maximize calendar availability for high-value tourism events. To remain relevant, Tempe must maximize its reputation as an events destination by securing high-value and professional media events. It's important a strong partnership with the City of Tempe, the Downtown Tempe Authority, and other city leaders curate an events calendar, you know, that's balancing tourism economic impact and community entertainment and recreation. So I look forward to this, working forward on this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. So what areas are we looking at for this application process? And where is Rio Salado? So Rio Salado is the area between Priest Drive and McClintock Drive that surrounds Tempe Town Lake. The primary areas we use are Tempe Beach Park, Arts Park, which is just east of TCA, Giuliano Park, just east of Mill Avenue Bridges, and what we call the North Bank Linear Tempe Town Lake, which is the north side of Tempe Town Lake. Those are the primary areas we're talking about. However, as we go along with this process, we can very well program further east of those areas. Downtown, the reason why we're including downtown in the same process is because what happens downtown affects Rio Salado, and what happens in Rio Salado affects downtown. And what we're considering downtown is the half square mile between Rio Salado Drive, University, Farmer, and College. So our proposed application process. The DTA and tourism and city staff came together and brainstormed some great ideas, and I think that we came up with a very successful and equitable application process. And the process is going to be that event producers are going to be invited to apply one time a year. All the event producers apply at the one time, apply for the date or dates they're looking for. We are going to form an application review committee that's going to establish the criteria that's going to be used to evaluate each application to determine which application gets what date based on that criteria. The application review committee will review the applications and assign dates. However, I don't want to get that committee confused with Special Events Task Force. The application review committee will establish dates for the event producers. However, that does not mean the event is approved. It will go through the same process events do now. There will be conversations with event producers. There will be review by the Special Events Committee and then Task Force Committee, and then approval at that point. And I'll pass this over to Kate.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you. As Linda mentioned, what happens at the lake impacts downtown and vice versa. And so we're really thrilled to be a part of this process. Reinventing the way that we kind of curate events is really important to our organization because we want people that are coming downtown and supporting our merchants. And as important as tourism is and having those large scale events, we want to simultaneously have an opportunity to consider some passive types of events that will be more geared toward resident and sort of the year-round use of the space. We want people that are living here to feel like this is their park. And so we're looking forward to having this process open up some of those days so that we can do things like pop-up art activations or having some local artisans selling, or maybe we're doing live painting on site, or having music events that are small scale, just, you know, a couple, 2-3 musicians. So things that might not cost money and generate revenue, but will be geared toward residents. And we don't want every event in the park to be something that people have to pay to attend or have to have, you know, some sort of ticket to get into. We want this also to be a space that people can use all year long. So very excited about this process. Thank you, Sean, Linda, and Mayor and Council for considering this.
Thank you so much, Kate. So the application review committee is going to be comprised of a multitude of members. There's going to be city personnel and community services, special events. Neighborhood services is going to play a key role. Also, our partners with the Downtown Tempe Authority and Tempe Tourism are going to be on the committee. And we have a couple of community members at large, a merchant and a resident. Our committee's focus, these are some of the focuses that we're going to have when we assign events to their dates. We want events that are going to spur tourism, are going to have a positive economic impact. Unique events that maybe haven't been in Tempe or in the Valley. We're going to balance resident needs and the impact of events. We want events that are going to support community pride and diversify our offerings so that we are offering concerts, festivals, athletic events, water events, so that we're offering a variety of things to the community.
All right, thanks, Linda. And again, I want to thank Brian and Kate for joining me this evening as well too. And again, I would be remiss. We have, you know, also sought just direction too from city leadership. So again, you know, our leaders, Keith Burke, Stephen Methvin, Andrew Chang, really appreciate their guidance and support and just pulling this together and providing some direction on this as well before we pulled this together, because they've been instrumental along that way of bringing these thoughts together and making sure we're staying on top of things. So what we're doing right now is we'd love to seek your input on this initiative and continue to move forward with it. We want to start meeting with the application committee and developing those protocols and parameters. In June, we would be looking at finalizing those application protocols. As we move then towards the latter part of summer, in August, we begin to notify the event producers of that deadline and the new process. And in October, we would set that application deadline. So for the events that want to take place, you know, they need to get their applications turned in by that time. And then by November, this application review committee will have had an opportunity to review the events and the applications that were submitted. And as Linda said, this isn't taking the place of the task force. This is really just looking at assigning dates and seeing what works best from a flow of programming. And that's why with this committee that we're working with, we're really wanting to keep that operational in nature. And members of the committee and the representatives from the different organizations really work in that role of the operations. And so that's what's been really great about this, is because these are the folks out there every day that are working on this. And so then we would then be able to notify event producers for the event starting in calendar year 2023 of their assigned date. And you'll notice that what we did is that we intentionally left 2022 the way that it is to allow for that transition and for us to be able to notify event producers, but also, you know, recognizing that we've just come through a pandemic. And, you know, for some folks, this is going to be a terrific opportunity this next year if they can get their event together, get their fundraising together. We can still host that event that was already on the books if they were counting on that. But this also allows sufficient time for any changes that we'll implement moving forward, because this will give the event producers over a year to decide whether or not, you know, if there is a change, would they like to continue, would they like to move to a different place in Tempe, or is there a way for them to revamp their event? You know, those types of considerations, we wanted to allow for adequate time for that. So at this time, there we go. I'd love to entertain any questions, comments, direction at this point from Mayor and Council. Again, appreciate your time this evening.
Great. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Kate. Really appreciate the presentation, and I'm just really excited about, you know, that we're looking at a lot of the programming in the downtown and lake area in a very different way. looking at what events are going to, really kind of generate revenue for the city, or what events are going to kind of brand Tempe and put us on the map even further. So, I mean, I'm really excited about that. And the other thing I was really excited to hear was the concept of trying to find ways to also program a lot of our parks and public spaces for the community. That was one of the things I know that was talked about, I've been talked to about that for years from residents saying, hey, we can appreciate the fact that a lot of these special events that come into town, like, bring a lot of revenue in terms of sales tax and bed tax, but sometimes we get bothered because there's a lot of detours in the downtown, and there are a lot of times where there's a lot of large portions of the Tempe Beach Park that are blocked off. And so I love the fact that we're talking about doing more programming for residents who are here 365 days during the year, and sort of looking at different ways to, bring in other kinds of events that we make sure that, we're kind of prioritizing in such a way where we're, really pushing it towards the events that are generating the money and really kind of helping to brand Tempe as the city to be in. So really excited about the presentation. I think it's wonderful, and just appreciate everyone from staff to the Downtown Tempe Authority and the Tempe Tourism Office working together hand in hand to put this together tonight. With that, I'm going to go ahead and look to Councilmember Garland.
Hi, thank you, Mayor. I just want to say I really do like the plan. I like the idea of this committee. It seems very organized to me. I like that you are, just as the mayor just said, about the DTA and the tourism department and the city all working together to do what's best for downtown Tempe, and realizing that it's not just one area of the city or downtown that we need to look at, but it's looking at a larger area, and that everybody works together. I really like that a lot. I think you guys have done a great job with this presentation, and I'm excited to see it move forward.
Thank you, Councilmember Navarro. Thank you, Councilmember Garland. Councilmember Navarro.
There you go. Thanks, Mayor. No, absolutely, Sean. Kate, thank you. Great presentation, and I love how the direction we go on making the best out of our lake and the events that we can do there. And with that said, I always bring this up, and I know that staff is somewhat working on this, is the fact of utilizing bollards in certain locations. And we talk about events, we talk about closing off areas, maybe within the park, but within our streets of downtown area, and utilizing those spaces when we can. I still think that, we have an opportunity to really utilize that piece of safety for those various events that we do on various streets. And once again, I guess I look to the council, I look to staff, here we are, we have COVID money. COVID money was a perfect place to utilize things like bollards to extend premise to those restaurants, to open up that space to, help them out. But as we go forward, getting out of the pandemic, now we can utilize things like that to actually help create the events that we'd like to do. And I think that we have an opportunity with that money, and if not this year, I hope next year, because this is the thing that I've been harping on for probably 10 years now, on how do we get this done. And I hope we can incorporate that. I know that within our committee, I think that me and Darlene would like to look at something like that and make sure that, Doreen, and make sure that we utilize that safety, and we can talk about that safety. So, I'm looking to the council, I'm looking to you, Sean, and everyone else to see if we can look into those things and utilize those safety measures when we talk about events. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Navarro. Any other council members, comments or questions? Okay, just a quick thing on Councilmember Navarro's comment, Sean. I guess I'll look to you to see if there's a way that you can incorporate, some of the bollards and things that Councilmember Navarro was talking about.
Yes, sir. We'll definitely look in that, and I'll circle up with Marilyn and her team, because I know we've had some other presentations and discussions on that in the past. So.
Okay. Sounds good, Council. Everyone okay with that?
Sounds good.
Okay. Sounds good. All right, great. Sean, you all good and all set with direction over here?
Yes, sir.
Wonderful. Once again, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And also thank you to Kate Borders and Brian McCartan as well for working together with our staff and Linda Cano and doing this presentation. Excellent job.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council.
All right, next up here, We've got item 2E, which is the initial recommended 5-year capital improvements program follow-up. Madam Clerk, I believe we have one comment card on this, or one speaker.
Yes, Mayor. Anna Mellis, who was absent earlier, is now present in the audience if she'd like to speak.
Excellent. All right, Ms. Mellis, you are ready to go whenever you are ready to go. You're very soft.
Okay, is this better?
A little bit better.
Okay, I'll just try and speak loudly. Good evening, council members. My name is Anna Mellis. I'm on the Tempe Sustainability Commission, and it's important to put enough money into climate action because environmental sustainability is one of the most imminent issues facing our era. It's crucial that the city of Tempe invests accordingly in the capital improvement plan. It's important for the City Council and the community alike to support and invest in climate action because the long-term impacts can be far more costly and devastating. If more money is put towards climate action now, the city might even save some in the long run. It is important that everyone in Tempe has a sustainable and livable future, and making sure that climate action is thoroughly funded will secure that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mellis. Really appreciate it. All right. Since there's no other comment cards, I'm going to go ahead. I think I see Ken Jones and Mark Day. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. I'm Ken Jones, Deputy City Manager and Chief Financial Officer, and I am joined by Mark Day. We have a brief presentation for you. If you recall, on March 18th, we came to you and presented the initial capital program, 5-year capital program for your review, and you gave us tremendous feedback, specifically calling out 13 projects that you would like to see advanced, fully further funded, or altered in some way. So we immediately went to work on looking at those projects to see what we could do to try to facilitate the requests that you made. Next slide, please, Mark. So our presentation here tonight is in line with what we typically do, which is to involve the public in our discussions and to be very transparent in the way in which we develop our budget. Next slide, please. So I do want to mention a few issues, though, Mayor, and that is that besides the projects that you identified, we went back to staff and we looked at some of the needs that hadn't been identified, and we made some minor adjustments. Mark will point those out to you. And then we also realized that we had the $46 million that we anticipate getting from the federal government in the form of increased funding for the Federal America Rescue Plan. So we used that funding to try to address the issues that you raised, and we did a pretty good job of incorporating that funding into everything you spoke to. However, we also know that there are ongoing conversations about projects that we have not yet prioritized. For instance, we have plans to design and schedule the movement of some of our outdoor yards, our priest yard, our traffic ops, our Hardy yard, and things like that, that we're in 4 or 5 years out from today. And we know that there's some discussion about accelerating some of those. Those are not currently incorporated into the CIP. So the plans we show you tonight incorporate the $46 million that we anticipate getting from the federal government. They do not anticipate yet accelerating those programs. So there will be some more adjustments down the road. And you know that. This is a 5-year plan. Only the first year is an actual budget. The other 4 years are just plans. And we will have to get back to you with adjustments as priorities change. So with that, I'll turn this over to Mark to address the 13 items you brought up, as well as some of the other issues we identified. Mark?
Thank you, Ken. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Mark Day, Municipal Budget Director. So as Ken mentioned, tonight we're going to review the proposed changes to the 13 projects that City Council had asked us to review during the initial recommended CIP on March 18th, as well as a few changes that staff is recommending. So the first one is Pavement Quality Index CIP projects. We are proposing 1.6 million additional funding over the final 3 years of those 2 projects. This would increase the total funding by 14 million over the 5 years over the current adopted 5-year CIP. The next project was Fire Station 3. We are proposing that design would move to 24-25 with construction starting in year 5 of the CIP. The Maple, Ash, Wilson, and Mitchell Park traffic calming, we're recommending full funding of that project in next fiscal year, 21-22. This project will require some additional public outreach and analysis before actual construction could occur. Roosevelt Storm Drain, we really appreciate your focus on this important project. We've looked at this project in detail. This project is being done in coordination with the City of Scottsdale and the Maricopa County Flood Control District. So at this point, it will need to remain as scheduled based on the timing and availability of funding from the City of Scottsdale and the Maricopa County Flood Control District. The next one was the carbon neutrality CIP project. So we are proposing adding $4 million over the final 4 years of the CIP. So for those projects related to the municipal carbon neutrality goals, staff is working with HDR, which is an engineering firm, to develop a plan to identify specific investments and their impact on reducing carbon emissions. And then for the community carbon neutrality goals, we are working with ASU to develop models that tie the dollar spent to the amount of carbon reductions. And then the Citizen Customer Relations, or CRM, technology solution. Thank you again for your attention to this project. We were able to move this up 2 years, so that will start in 22-23. The next project that you had mentioned was the acquisition of the non-congregate shelter. So as you recall, this was in the red list, on our green, yellow, red list. We have proposed that this move up to funding in year 5, $5.9 million. It is important to note that this project does have estimated operating impacts of approximately, we're estimating at $1.3 million per year. Park recreational value, we're proposing $2.7 million be added over the last 4 years of the CIP. So this would bring the project back up to what the department initially recommended. Fire Station 8, we are planning to move design up 1 year to 24-25, but construction would have to occur subsequent to the proposed 5-year CIP. The new North Tempe Police Substation, so we're proposing moving funding up 1 year with design starting in 24-25. It is important to note that this project does have development impact fees associated with it, and that will cover approximately $8 million of the cost of the project. The next one is the City Hall Complex, restrooms and parking. So this project is scheduled for design in 22-23 with construction tentatively scheduled for 23-24. We're adding $3 million to this project for sustainability type projects. Those could include things such as solar, electrical vehicle charging stations, those type of things. The Family Advocacy Center was another project. We are recommending full funding in 21-22. So Human Services staff is working with all the stakeholders on this project, the police department, ASU, to find an appropriate site. And then the last of the 13 projects was the Ken McDonald Golf Clubhouse renovation. So we are recommending that planning for this project would move to year 5, but construction would have to move to after the next year's 5-year CIP. And those are the 13, and then staff, after submitting their initial recommended CIP projects, had some revisions and additions, and these are primarily for higher cost estimates or deficiencies that were noted that need to be taken care of sooner than later. So for example, the chilled water loop, which cools and heats a lot of the downtown buildings, city facilities, deficiencies were noted in the piping under 5th Street, and that needs to be taken care of next year rather than an out year where it was scheduled. And you'll see on the slide there's most of these are just for additional funding or moving up the project. And then we had the wastewater biomarker. We're adding $200,000 for next fiscal year. And then there's one new project. ADOT wants us to update our signalized equipment related to streets around the I-10 Broadway curve. So it's in conjunction with that construction project. That is a $1.2 million project, but it will be funded by ADOT on a reimbursement basis.
So Mayor and Council, as I said earlier, these are going to require adjustments. We know that, and we are prepared to make those adjustments as priorities change. And we have several unknowns. When we said we're going to use the federal funding, at this point, we have been given estimates of getting $46 million. We've been told it will probably come over 2 years, $23 million in each of the next 2 years. But we've also been told that there might be restrictions on when the money must be spent and on what it can be spent. So when we get more information about that, we'll have to shift some funding around to make sure we comply with all of the federal requirements. This does, though, allocate the entire $46 million that we anticipate getting to those projects that you said are most important to you. I think it makes sense to allocate them to a non-recurring project since it's non-recurring funding. I think it's a good, clean use of the funds, which will make other funds available for other projects. So that's good. But we want to hear your feedback tonight on how you think we address the projects that you brought forward and any other comments you might have. We are still involving the public, and we want your input throughout this process. Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Mayor.
Great. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Mark. Thank you for the presentation. Council members, comments or questions? Councilmember Cubie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question about the wastewater analytics, adding 200,000. We say in the justification that city departments and community partners are provided early signals and trends on the dashboard to inform operational strategies. So before we decide on that, could I have some more information, either in the Friday packet or somewhere, Rule of 7, just to kind of explain all that more? Because I know that, you know, there's been other, like the New America Project does a housing insecurity study, and it really helps to inform where you should direct a lot of resources during COVID times. And I'm just wondering how direct that impact has been to justify that big increase, because since the time of the since the time we first invested, we put in, with the innovation fund, we put in quite a bit of money. And I just want to know, you know, from my reading, I'm hearing that where the analytics programs are most useful is when you have a discrete unit, like a dorm, for example, at U of A, and you can identify before there's an outbreak that there's going to be an outbreak, you know, a day or a few days before. But with increased testing and availability, that's even not as seen as useful a tool anymore. There's just a lot in that whole area of expertise that's being sort of questioned now. So I just want to get a little more information on what that is going to bring us in terms of direct operational strategies.
Thank you, Mayor Woods, Councilmember Cubie. The plan is to use the money that's being added here to break up the largest area where we draw samples from currently. That was what was proposed to the City Council, and we got consensus to do that. But you're right, unless you're using the data for some outcome, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But I believe we will get that to you in a Friday packet. We'll work with strategic management and diversity to get that to you in a Friday packet. But I believe what we're looking at here is breaking down those areas so that we can improve the outreach to the communities that might be affected. Today it's COVID-19. In the future, it might be something else that we detect in the waste stream, but it's trying to break those communities down into smaller segments. So we'll get that information to you. I appreciate your feedback.
Great, thank you, Councilmember Cubie. Councilmember Garland.
Hi, thank you. Ken, I was just going to mention that the National League of Cities has a meeting every Friday at 1:30 Eastern time where they discuss the monies that are coming in, the federal monies that are coming into each one of the cities. And what they do is they talk about, specifically it's a federal advocacy team, and they talk about what's the latest thing they heard from the Treasury Department and any principles that the municipalities can learn to get prepared for the monies coming in. But they do it every Friday now, and I'll be more than happy to forward you the link that I have if anybody would be interested in being a part of that.
Great, I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Garland. One thing on my end, The only, I'm first of all, I'm good with everything that was presented in the presentation, so I appreciate that. The only one item that I had a little bit of a concern about was the item about the non-congregate shelter, and here's why. I know that Naomi Farrell has like a kind of an ambitious plan along with Paul Bentley about how we can do more work in human services and with our unsheltered population in the upcoming year. And so one of my thoughts is the additional FTEs she's requesting to do some of that additional work. I worry that we may not have enough places for people to go if that plan isn't approved, if that project isn't approved until year 5. So I think that's my only concern. I want to make sure that we're that it all kind of works synergistically. If they're really working Care 7 and the Hope team to talk to a lot of folks who are really sort of suffering out on the street, that we actually have a place to direct them to for shelter and services. So that's my only concern about that one.
Thank you, Mayor. And we do have flexibility to move things around. In a typical year, what I would be telling you is we don't have bond authorization. And the reason that's out in year 4 or 5 is we have to go back to the voters in 2024 to get bond authorization to be able to do this. But because we're getting cash from the federal government, we have applied that as best we can to those projects that we need to move up earlier. But we also know that, priorities change. And when we come back and say we really need to move this up to year 1 or 2, we will have the ability this year better than we would have in any other year because it isn't all dependent upon bond authorization. Some of it will be cash funded.
Sounds good.
We will take your direction on that. The reason it's in year 5 is because it was we hope to do this project versus we need to do this project. And so if you move this up to year 1 or 2, you're pushing projects back that are already planned and ready to go in the hopes that this one gets started. I like going the other way, to be honest, and keep this back in the sidelines. And then as it becomes viable, then you get it up there.
No, thank you, Ken. I really appreciate that. So what you're saying is if for whatever reason, like an opportunity does become available, the acquisition of a hotel or motel or old apartment complex or something of that nature, we have the flexibility to make that decision as a council to move forward, more immediately. Like we're not completely locked into year 5.
Yes, I don't want you to get spoiled, Mayor, because typically we couldn't do this because of the bond authorization, but this federal funding is providing an opportunity that we don't typically have. So the answer is yes.
Sounds good. Thank you, Ken. I appreciate that. Councilmember Arredondo Savage and then Councilmember Cubie.
Right on. Thank you, Mayor. I certainly appreciate it. Hey, Ken Jones, to you and the team, Mark Day. I just want to say you guys did a really phenomenal job. We threw a lot at you when we had the opportunity, and I think you guys just kind of really embraced the challenge. And I just want to say kudos to you and your work, and also thank you, I think, to the departments that said, hey, look, we've got some other projects that we think are really important, and I think that's one of the things that we need to make sure that we are listening to some of those challenges that we're going to have. But I agree. I do think that we have some things coming up that we're going to have to really talk about our responsibility, whether it's moving facilities or rebuilding facilities. So I know this may change moving forward, but I thought you guys did a great job. The one thing I would like to get some more information on and just some more clarity in, and it's that the City Hall complex restrooms and parking. I just want to ensure, because it says 3 million added for sustainability demonstration projects. I wasn't sure, is that all construction? Is it, when you talk about demonstration projects, could you just, and you don't have to even tell me today, you can just get me some information in the future. I just really want to ensure that, we're not building really phenomenal Taj Mahal type of restrooms or whatever it may be, because I wasn't sure if the 3 million's outside of the construction for the parking, or if that was just maybe to implement charging stations or solar or whatever that may be. So if you could get me some more info on that would be really helpful, and the total amount for that project too.
Thank you, Councilmember. And we'll get that to you as soon as we can. That's actually a swag by me to put money in there that says if we had to guess how much would it cost to cover that in solar and potentially use the solar as trickle charging for electric vehicles, what would that cost? Now, it's very likely that Braden will do his magic and go out and find partners in some of the utility providers to make this more affordable. And in that case, the money might be better spent on sustainability projects in other locations. But that is kind of a guess. And but I will have Braden follow up with you on what he thinks as he gets more information, what he thinks the actual cost would be.
That's great. That's all I could ask for. Thank you very much. And just kind of more of the specifics of what that's going to look like too would be really helpful, I think, moving forward. So thank you on that.
I think Braden wants to know that he wants to know more clarity on what I committed him to as well. So.
Well, no, don't tell him that.
Thank you, Councilmember Arredondo Savage. I don't know. I kind of want to see what the Taj Mahal of bathrooms looks like. I'm trying to visualize that myself. So
there will be no plumbing going to it, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Cubie and then Councilmember Navarro.
Mayor, yeah, I just wanted to remind everybody that we do have permanent supportive housing in the budget coming up this year, this fiscal year, 3.5 million, and that's for permanent supportive housing, and that's obviously going to be non-congregate, but it comes with wraparound services and all, so that's an added bonus. We're not waiting too far off to have a substantial project that will alleviate housing shortages amongst those who are most in need. So I wanted just to bring our minds to that. And then I hosted an event the other day with Regina Romero, and she spoke about the American Jobs Plan. Now, certainly it's not even close to approval, and there's a lot of steps and hoops, and we don't even know if it will pass at all. But she had made the point that in their budget process this year, they're putting aside, they're getting ready. Like, we know what buckets there might be with the American Jobs Plan and basically the infrastructure plan that Joe Biden is putting together. And are we going to be prepared if we do get funding through that in the next, because it could be in 6 months or less. Will we have things ready to go so we could be shovel ready with certain projects, because the American Jobs Plan and the infrastructure plan is defining infrastructure in a way that really aligns with Tempe in terms of green infrastructure and a lot of climate adaptations. And we could be really primed for some of those, some of that funding that's funding we have to apply for, or some of the funding that comes to us automatically.
Well, Councilmember, you've made a really good point, and you know as well as anybody that we can't spend money unless it is budgeted in that fiscal year. And Mark and I have been talking about the unknowns coming from the federal government are just overwhelming to some extent. We might ask the city council for a very large capital contingency and a very large operating contingency this year, which just gives us the authority to spend should funding become available. So we will be prepared to do that, but I appreciate you bringing that up.
Thank you, I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Councilmember Cubie. Councilmember Navarro?
Yeah, no, thank you, Mayor. You know, I appreciate, again, your time you put in this, and obviously there's a lot of things here that are needed in the city, and I always say going forward, you know, we always need a lot of good stuff. I do appreciate, I just want to say with our wastewater expansion of the areas that have larger than normal identifications for capturing COVID, I think it was area 1. You know, being able to split that up, adding more money and resources towards the finding of the COVID virus, for the finding of any viruses, and also for going forward when we get back into our opioid collection and getting into the data traction of that. Once again, I think these types of projects that are being funded, like the wastewater, is going to have a true impact when we talk about the COVID virus, when we talk about reopening of our city. And just keep in mind, you know, Ebola is another disease that is actually up and coming right now that we, as the public safety, we are now starting to look into. So there are more things that are happening, you know, possibly around the world, but us to be in front of this stuff, to have the ability to identify, you know, any new findings that come through our wastewater that can protect our residents, not only our residents, the region, because we might be person only right now for a while, to have this kind of identifier. It's going to be strategically important that we keep and continue to support this stuff. So I just want to say thank you, Ken, for finding those resources for us, and Rose Sanchowski and her team on collection of this data. I think this is vitally important. So I appreciate it, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. And it's a great partnership we have with ASU. And I think you're right that we don't know what the future will hold. And the fact is COVID-19 is today's issue, but any one of those SARS strains of virus might be detected by ASU in the future. And if we had this in place as COVID-19 was picking up, we might have been the first to notify people that a SARS strain is present in Tempe, and we would have been on the lookout. So we just don't know what the future holds. To some extent, this is planning for the future. And if ASU decides they want to pull the plug on this project and not do this testing anymore, then these will go to waste. We really need to maintain that great relationship we have with ASU.
Absolutely, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Navarro. Any other council members, any comments or questions for Ken or Mark? All right, hearing none.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Great presentation. Next up here, we have item 2F, which is the 2021 solid waste rate study. Excuse me, it's getting late. Any speaker cards received, Madam Clerk?
Nothing for this item, Mayor.
Sounds good. Well, with that said, I'm going to go ahead and call upon Terry Pecars.
Thank you, Mayor. There we go. Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Terry Pecars, Municipal Utilities Director, and I'm here with you this evening to introduce the 2021 Solid Waste Rate Study. We're here seeking your feedback and policy guidance as we embark on this important effort. In addition to introducing this year's rate study, I'll also provide a brief review of the city's solid waste services, outline our public outreach and communication plan, and review the rate study timeline. We'll return to Council in the fall to share the findings and recommendations of the rate study, review staff's community involvement and outreach efforts, and seek further guidance from you. The 2021 Solid Waste Rate Study aligns with and supports City Council strategic priorities 1.27, City Infrastructure and Assets, 2.02, Customer Service Satisfaction, 4.04, Solid Waste Landfill Diversion, 4.12, Composting, and 5.01, Quality of Business Services. A robust solid waste program provides the community with a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment that promotes economic development and improves the quality of life for its citizens. Funding for solid waste services and solid waste utility is structured within a self-supporting, business-like enterprise fund. This means that services are funded by the rates, charges, and fees paid by the customers who use those services, not by tax dollars. The periodic review of rates, charges, and fees is an important component of a well-managed and operated utility. The purpose of a cost of service or rate study is to evaluate the cost of providing services, determine the revenue requirements necessary to maintain the financial health of the utility, and recommend adjustments to rates, charges, and fees where appropriate to ensure that revenues are collected are sufficient and that rates, charges, and fees align with the organization's strategic and operational goals. As utility costs throughout the country continue to rise, Tempe Solid Waste Utility is committed to managing costs and staying efficient while upholding the city's commitment to a sustainable future. The city's team of solid waste professionals is dedicated to providing essential services that keep our community clean, safe, and healthy. Solid waste services include collecting, processing, and transporting solid waste, including residential garbage, recycling, and uncontained or bulk materials, commercial, industrial, and household hazardous waste for proper disposal, reuse, or repurposing. Additional services include compost inert processing and alley maintenance. Each of these activities will be evaluated during the study. It's also important to note that there are that these services are executed utilizing a fleet of refuse trucks and a variety of other light and heavy-duty vehicles and equipment, and these critical assets are supported by a team of highly skilled fleet service professionals who maintain, repair, and ensure their reliability. The city provides once per week residential garbage and commingled recycling collection service to the Tempe community. Each week, approximately 1,000 tons of residential garbage and recycling is collected and transported for disposal. Volume-based pricing provides customers that don't require a 96-gallon capacity garbage container the option of downsizing to a 48-gallon or 65-gallon container at a reduced cost. This option is not available for alley residential collection customers. Green Organics curbside collection is offered in limited areas of the city at an additional charge. The city provides residents with several additional services not always offered by municipal solid waste utilities. These services align with community and city council priorities relative to sustainability and environmental stewardship. Uncontained or bulk curbside and alley collection is offered bi-monthly for garbage and green organics. Residents can safely dispose of potentially hazardous household waste at the Household Products Collection Center. Zero waste days provide opportunities for residents to donate usable items not accepted in the recycling container to local organizations for reuse or repurposing. Customers receiving curbside or alley residential garbage and recycling collection service are eligible to dispose of up to 1,000 pounds of waste per month at the Sky Harbor Regional Transfer Station at no additional charge. The city offers a full range of commercial solid waste services for businesses, contractors, and multifamily residential developments in Tempe, including a variety of container size options. Recycling services include cardboard, office paper, newspaper, or a commingled program. Roll-off service is offered for those customers in need of large containers for disposing of construction debris or large bulky items. Delivery or collection of roll-off containers is typically provided on a next-day basis. During COVID-19, the city expanded outreach and offered enhanced services to commercial customers, including service delivery changes to aid businesses in right-sizing during the economic downturn. While special events garbage and recycling service is operating below full cost recovery, the city continues to explore new and innovative ways to encourage and support zero waste or low waste events. Tempe was the first city in the valley to process its own green organics and return it to the community as compost, saving money on disposal costs while conserving valuable landfill space. Asphalt millings are processed and reused as alleyway repair and reconditioning material. Other inert material is screened, sorted, and stockpiled for future reuse or sale. Data collected since January 2020 will be used during the 2021 solid waste rate study to determine the revenue required to meet current and future anticipated operating costs of the compost inert yard at various service levels, including bagging compost and establishing a competitive price point. It's necessary to establish these costs and set appropriate fees to recover the cost of the operation. Once rates are identified, they will be evaluated for market competitiveness, which will help the city assess the long-term feasibility of continued compost inert operations. Tempe has 165 miles of alleyways. These civil assets are not only important for solid waste operations, but also for police, fire, and other utility companies. The city's alley maintenance program executes preventative and reactive maintenance activities to city alleys to ensure that public safety and utility service maintenance and repair vehicles and equipment have reliable and safe access to infrastructure located within, above, or buried underneath the alley. Responsibilities include maintenance and repair of the physical civil asset or alleyway and city code enforcement and abatement activities associated with alley ingress and egress. Code enforcement and abatement are necessary to manage illegal dumping of refuse and to address city code violations specific to public utility easement or right-of-way. The goal of the program is to maintain 40 miles of alleyway per year. In addition to the city's annual operations and maintenance budget approved by council, a grant-funded alley stabilization project for 4 neighborhoods begins in fiscal year 22-23, pending council approval of the city's proposed capital improvement program. The neighborhoods include Hudson Manor, University Heights, Clark Park, and Mitchell. There are several components to a comprehensive solid waste rate study, starting with the utilities' revenue requirements. The utilities' revenue requirements represent the total amount of money a utility must collect from customers to pay all costs of providing the service. This is determined by identifying all current and estimated future operations and maintenance and capital costs over a 10-year period. This process ensures that the utility will have enough revenue to fund services and meet its reserve fund balance policy. Once revenue requirements are determined, the next step in the process is proportional cost allocation. The study is developed utilizing industry standard best practices in the United States. Following the standard, costs are allocated proportionally to each customer class based on the true cost to provide solid waste services to that class. Once the utility's revenue requirements have been determined, costs have been allocated proportionally by customer, the next step in the process is rate design. Rate design is the development of the most appropriate rate structure to satisfy an organization's strategic and operational goals. Objectives can range from promoting environmental stewardship and sustainability to minimizing customer affordability concerns to promoting economic development. Rate design also includes an analysis of the impact of proposed rate adjustments or rate structure changes on the utility customers. This analysis includes seeking a feedback from city leadership, city council, and the community, and making adjustments where appropriate. The ultimate success of any rate study is largely dependent on communication. Communication throughout this process is key to ensuring utility customer involvement and understanding of the rate study process and data, the potential need for adjustments, national trends, and council priorities. Active stakeholder participation is an effective way of involving the community served and the respective customer classes while receiving input and ensuring transparency, and is vital to a comprehensive rate study process. Working with our partners in neighborhood services, communication and media relations, and strategic management and diversity, we will engage customers and the community in a number of different ways. A public involvement plan has been developed that incorporates the equity and inclusion objectives of the organization and will be executed to ensure broad community engagement. Outreach efforts will include hosting 3 public meetings, in-person outreach events at community centers, 2 public comment survey periods, the first to collect input to be considered in the rate study process, and the second to gather feedback on the recommendations of the rate study, utilization of a regularly updated rate study webpage, a marketing campaign that includes traditional printed materials and a digital effort through social media, and formal presentations to Tempe's Neighborhood Advisory Commission, Sustainability Commission, and the Escalante Neighborhood Association. The public involvement plan is included in your packet for today's meeting. Before the study recommendations come before council in the fall, staff will provide council with a comprehensive public input summary. The 2021 solid waste rate study is underway. Data collection has commenced and numerous working meetings between city staff and our financial consultant have already occurred or are scheduled. This presentation officially marks the beginning of staff's public outreach efforts. Presentations, public meetings, and a public comment survey will occur throughout the spring and summer. Over the next several months, these efforts will continue as we execute the study to inform staff's decisions. In August, we'll return to council and provide the results and recommendations of the study, and thereafter public outreach will continue as we seek customer and community input on the rate study results and communicate potential impacts. In October, council will be asked to consider adoption of any proposed solid waste rate adjustments. If adopted by council, the new rates will become effective in January 2022. As mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we're here this afternoon seeking your feedback and policy guidance. In addition to what's been described and will be included in our analysis, if there's a particular area of our service council would like staff to consider during the rate study, we would appreciate your comments and feedback. And thank you for the opportunity to address you this evening, and thank you for your continued support.
Thank you, Terry. Really appreciate it. I want to look to the council for any comments or questions for Terry on the solid waste presentation. Terry, every time you give a presentation, this is exactly what happens. The presentation is so good, there's no questions. So
thank you, Mayor.
Oh, I see Councilmember Adams.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to tell Terry that is an awesome presentation, and you do such a good job. And it's just you're a breath of fresh air as how you handle things, and you have my full support. And good job on your presentation. So thank you.
Thank you, council member. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Adams. Any other council members, comments or questions for Terry? Seeing none. Terry, thank you so much for a great presentation. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, council.
All right, next up we have item 2G, future agenda items. Council members may request that an agenda item be added to a future issue review session. In accordance with the Arizona Open Meeting Law, there should be no discussion on the item other than to clarify the request. Any future agenda items that council would like to see added to a future issue review session? All right, hearing none. The next item on the agenda is the call to the audience for committee of the whole items. Under sections 4A and 4B, audience members will have up to 3 minutes to address the City Council. Madam Clerk, are there any speaker or comment cards received from the public?
None that haven't already been addressed earlier, Mayor.
Okay, so we'll move on from item number 3 here. Item number 4 is Committee of the Whole items. Moving on to item 4A1, Sustainable and Livable Communities Council Update, Animal Welfare Budget Consideration Follow-Up. I mentioned earlier this evening that I was planning on pulling this to get some additional information from staff. I wanted to really check with the chairs, the co-chairs, Councilmember Jennifer Adams and Councilmember Lauren Kuby, if it's okay that we potentially bump this item to the May 6th work study.
I'm fine with that, Mr. Mayor. This is Councilmember Adams.
Thank you. Councilmember Kuby? Councilmember Kuby, if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Oops, I'm sorry. Yeah, I did one of those. Yes, I'm fine with that, Mr. Mayor.
Great, thank you so much. All right, well, then that item will be moved to the May 6th work study session. Thank you so much. Next up, we have item 4B1, micromobility, which was formerly the bicycle safety and shared active transportation vehicles. That was Vice Mayor Keating and Councilmember Navarro. This working group, this is the last remaining working group from the previous system. As many folks know, we've transitioned to council committees, and so we were phasing out all the old working groups and transferring the remaining work to the new council committees. So just wanted to note that this working group is being closed. Any comments from Vice Mayor Keating or Councilmember Navarro, or are we good just closing it out?
Mayor, I think we should keep it open so future generations of Tempeans will know how we did business way back when.
Is there a time capsule around here somewhere?
Yeah, there's one under Randy's desk. Check it out.
Well, since I'm in the office, I'm going to go check for it as soon as the meeting's over. Okay, so all good closing that one out then. Thank you very much to Vice Mayor Keating and Councilmember Navarro. Next up, we have item 5. Mayor's announcements and city manager's announcements. I just have one announcement here, which is the Public Safety Telecommunicator Week proclamation. So during an emergency, the voice that you hear over the phone when calling 911 is often overlooked in the public service field. But for 1 week each year, they are honored for their days, nights, weekends, and holidays spent as the unsung heroes of emergency services. Public safety telecommunicators around the nation serve as the lifeline between members of the community with emergency needs and the medical, fire, and law enforcement first responders. They are recognized nationally during the second week of April for National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week. And today, I would like to dedicate the following proclamation to Keegan Jones and Robbie Ann Hardesty in the Tempe PD Communications and Dispatch Division. And so that proclamation reads as following. Whereas the public safety dispatch professionals of the City of Tempe Police Communication Center provide life-saving services vital to the people in our community in partnership with all city departments, including Tempe Fire, Medical Rescue, Care 7, Homeless Outreach, Transportation, and our neighboring jurisdictions. And whereas 911 call takers assist the caller with over-the-phone support and emergency instruction that save lives every day on every shift, handling over 132,000 calls for service in 2020, despite the impacts of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. And whereas dispatchers provide the critical connection between those experiencing an emergency and the responding emergency crews, ensuring that the commensurate personnel and resources are dispatched to the call. And whereas tactical radio operators provide a life-saving and critical communications function in connecting public safety agencies and personnel to one another on scene and en route to hospitals. And whereas the communications personnel are our community's first responders, daily working above and beyond the call of duty in situations of great stress and suffering to facilitate resolution of emergency situations, including drownings, vehicle accidents, fires, and other emergency calls for assistance. And whereas the health and safety of the Tempe community and its residents greatly depends on these services and the dedicated professionals who daily provide them. Now therefore I, Corey D. Woods, Mayor of the City of Tempe, Arizona, do hereby declare April 11th to the 17th, 2021 as Public Safety Telecommunicator Week in Tempe, Arizona. And once again, want to say congratulations to Keegan Jones and Robbie Ann Hardesty in the Tempe PD Communications Dispatch Division. All right. Next up here, item number 6. Actually,
yeah. See him there.
Yeah. Thank you, Councilmember Arredondo Savage. Mr. City Manager, Any announcements on your end?
None tonight. Thank you.
Great. With that said, our next meeting date is scheduled for April 22nd, 2021. This meeting is adjourned at 7:31 p.m. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a good night and have a great weekend.
Thank you, Mayor.